He was not the first Morty. He was not the last. But from the very beginning there was something unexplainable about him, something gentle, a kind of quiet seeing. When the others rushed, he lingered. When the others spoke, he listened. And, though his life began in the chaos of infinite Ricks, his heart seemed to belong to some older rhythm, something softer, almost like a lullaby carried on a drifting star. And before we go further, I want to pause to tell you this. We truly love you and we truly care for you. This story is not just about Morty. In some way, it's about you too. Before we begin the journey, tell us, where in the world are you listening from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, breathe deeply, and let's begin. He did not remember much of those first years, but there was one thread that seemed to stay with him, as though it had been sewn into the lining of his thoughts before he ever learned to speak. It was the sense that he could see things differently. Not brighter, not louder, just deeper. When the corridors of the Citadel were filled with the chatter of Ricks and the restless shuffle of Mortys, he would drift toward the corners, away from the crowd, watching. There, in the thin sliver of silence that existed between footsteps, he would notice small things, the way a shadow bent when someone passed beneath the lamps, or the way a tired Rick's sigh carried more weight than his words. Other Mortys rushed to keep up, to mimic the rhythm of their Ricks, to avoid punishment or indifference. But this Morty, without meaning to, often lingered. It puzzled him, even as a child. Why should he care if the paint on the wall peeled like a secret map? Why should his heart soften when another Morty dropped his books and no one stopped to help? He could never quite explain it, but those moments seemed louder to him than the chaos surrounding them. When the other Mortys teased him for daydreaming, he smiled quietly, as though their words were only wind moving past his ears. He wasn't hurt, not really. He was simply elsewhere, as though a part of him was already looking past the Citadel, past the endless sameness, into a horizon no one else believed was there. Sometimes, late at night, he would press his face to the cold glass of the sleeping quarters and stare out at the light. From within, the Citadel was noisy and alive, but outside, in that vast silence, stars pulsed with patient rhythm. He didn't know their names, and he didn't need to. It was enough to know they were there, waiting like kind guardians in the distance. A part of him thought they must be watching, must be whispering to him in ways too quiet for the others to hear. And then there were the colors. This was the strangest part. He began to see shades others didn't seem to notice. Not brilliant hallucinations, not frightening visions, just subtle variations. The blue of a wall would seem to shimmer into green if he stared long enough. The silver reflection of a passing ship seemed to carry a faint warmth of gold, as though sunlight was hidden deep inside the metal. And sometimes, when someone spoke from their heart, their voice left a faint trace in the air, a tint he could not name. It wasn't supernatural in the way stories might have told it. It was gentle, understated, like an extra sense that belonged to him alone. He never boasted of it. In fact, he hid it carefully. To explain such a thing to Ricks would mean ridicule, experiments, maybe even punishment. So he said nothing. But inside it made him feel apart. Not better, not worse, simply different. There was a day he remembered with particular clarity, though nothing extraordinary had happened. He was perhaps 8 years old, sitting on a step outside the mess hall. Other Mortys were eating quickly, some laughing, some fighting, most pretending they didn't care. He sat quietly, holding his sandwich without biting into it. The bread was uneven, the filling dull, but he noticed the way the crumbs clung to his fingertips, each one a tiny shape of its own. He watched a Morty pass by, shoulders hunched, tray empty, because his Rick hadn't bothered to get him food. For a moment, their eyes met. The other boy looked away, embarrassed, but before he could disappear, this Morty held out half of his sandwich. No words, no explanation, just the small, quiet offering. The other Morty took it, stunned. He didn't thank him, but the way he held the bread, the way he ate slowly instead of greedily, told the truth of his gratitude. And though no one else noticed, this Morty felt something shift inside. It was not grand or loud, just a small warmth, like the hush that follows a lullaby. He knew then that even in a place built on control and indifference, small kindnesses could bloom quietly, unseen, like flowers sprouting in cracks of stone. He carried that lesson in silence. Days passed, years began to stretch, and still he lingered on details others brushed aside. A Rick might shout at him for hesitating, and yet, while being scolded, he noticed the way the man's hands trembled from exhaustion. Another Morty might mock his slow pace, yet he saw in the boy's eyes a hunger to be seen. It was as though his vision bent inward, not only outward. He did not simply look at people, he looked into them, and sometimes when the weight of it all pressed too heavily, he would retreat again to the glass, to the stars. They never mocked him, they never demanded, they simply pulsed, steady and timeless, like old friends humming across the void. He would close his eyes and imagine drifting toward them, not in a ship, not through technology, but simply by stretching himself thin as light, dissolving into their calm. Perhaps that was why he often seemed quiet, even when the others played or argued. His silence was not emptiness, it was fullness, overflowing with the small treasures no one else stopped to gather. He didn't yet know what it meant, didn't yet understand why his heart worked that way. But deep down, he sensed it was leading him somewhere. He sensed there was more to him than just another Morty in the crowd. At times he wondered if it was a mistake, this strange way of seeing. It brought loneliness. It made him different, easy to overlook, easy to discard. Yet, even in his most uncertain moments, there was a soft reassurance inside him, as though some ancient presence whispered, "Stay as you are." And so he did. Nights blurred into mornings, the Citadel spun in its rhythm, and still he watched, listened, lingered. He noticed cracks no one else cared about, whispers no one else remembered, the faint blush of colors that others insisted were not there. And though the world around him remained loud and sharp, inside he carried a meadow of gentleness, quiet and green, waiting patiently to grow. He was still young when the memory of a sandwich became more than just a fleeting act. It was strange how something so ordinary could linger longer than great speeches, longer than the noise of crowded halls. He found himself thinking about it, not in words, but in the soft aftertaste of kindness. That day had etched itself into him, and though the bread was gone and the boy had long vanished into the tide of Mortys, the feeling remained like a quiet lamp that refused to burn out. As days turned, the mess hall became his favorite place, not for the food, but for the way. It revealed truths about people. He watched Ricks shove trays into hands without looking, Mortys hurrying to eat before their masters called them back, others sulking because the portions were small. It was a noisy room, filled with scraping forks and the buzz of lamps overhead, and yet for him, It was a place of silences. Each silence was different. The heavy silence of a Morty who never spoke, the sharp silence of a Rick calculating, the trembling silence of someone trying not to cry. He noticed them all, and in his noticing, he carried a strange tenderness. One afternoon he found himself sitting beside a Rick who looked older than most. His lab coat was frayed at the edges, his hair wiry and grey rather than sharp and spiked like the others. The old man sat with his food untouched, staring down at the tray as though it held memories instead of meals. Morty hesitated, then slid closer, his sandwich still in hand. He did not speak. Words often seemed too small for the weight he wanted to share. Instead, he placed half of his sandwich on the tray. The old Rick blinked, eyes watery from fatigue or age. Morty couldn't tell. For a moment it seemed the man would push it away, but instead he let out a sound that was neither a laugh nor a sob. Something caught between the two. He picked up the bread with careful hands, chewing slowly, as though each bite held the taste of something forgotten. When he looked at Morty, the boy felt it again, that quiet recognition, that strange bond born not of names or roles, but of simple human hunger met with simple human care. The Rick did not thank him, but his silence carried gratitude far stronger than words. It became a ritual after that. Sometimes when Morty noticed someone too weary to eat or too proud to ask, he would share what he had. It wasn't rebellion, it wasn't bravery, it was just natural. The act of splitting something ordinary made the air feel softer, made the Citadel less like a prison and more like a place where souls could still reach for one another. He began to think of sandwiches not just as food, but as small bridges, crumbs laid across the emptiness. The quiet of nights he thought about this strangeness. Why did such small things matter so much to him? Other Mortys longed for escape, dreamed of glory, or drowned themselves in imitation. He longed for something quieter, something harder to explain, a moment of stillness, the kind that carried warmth even when the room was cold. And in that longing he found both comfort and ache. Comfort, because it gave his days shape. Ache, because it set him apart from everyone else. There was another boy, slightly older, who began to notice him. This Morty had sharper eyes, restless, hands, and a voice that often cut through conversations like glass. One day, after watching him split his food again, the boy whispered, almost mocking, "You think that makes you different? You think they'll remember you for giving away bread?" Morty did not argue. He only shrugged, looking down at the crumbs in his palm. "Maybe," he said softly, "but even if they don't remember, I will." The other boy frowned, unsettled, and walked away. Morty sat there, not hurt, but heavy with thought. Memory itself was a kind of shelter, he realized. To remember kindness was to make it real again, even when the moment had passed. Perhaps no one else cared, but his heart cared, and that was enough. As weeks stretched, the Citadel taught its usual lessons: obedience, silence, usefulness. Yet Morty's true lessons came from these quieter exchanges. He learned how hunger changed a person's face, how loneliness made shoulders curve inward, how gratitude often shone brighter in silence than in speech. And though he could not yet name it, he was building a skill, a kind of seeing that went beyond sight. One evening, the old Rick with tired eyes stopped him in the hall. His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "You notice too much, kid," he muttered, as though accusing him of a crime. "You see what you shouldn't." Morty tilted his head. "Is that bad?" the old man sighed, looking out toward the stars, through a nearby window. Not bad, just heavy. Seeing too much makes the world heavier. Morty thought about this long after the Rick shuffled away. He wondered if his heart would always carry weight, if his eyes would always pick up colors others ignored. And though the thought made him ache, it also comforted him, for in that heaviness there was meaning, and in meaning there was life. Later that night, unable to sleep, he found himself back at the glass. The stars shimmered faintly, like tiny lanterns scattered across a vast ceiling. He pressed his forehead to the cool surface and whispered to them, though he knew they could not answer. "If I see too much, it's because you taught me to. Don't let me stop." The stars twinkled back, patient and wordless. He closed his eyes, imagining their quiet hum folding around him like a blanket. In that stillness, he drifted, not into full sleep, but into a soft, in-between state where dreams touched gently against his waking thoughts. And in that dreamlike drift, the memory of a sandwich returned again, carrying with it all the tenderness of small kindnesses, echoing like lullabies through the corridors of his mind. The Citadel was alive in ways most Mortys never stopped to consider. Its endless corridors buzzed with machinery, the hum of laboratories, the clatter of footsteps on metal floors. But if one paused, if one truly stood still, the Citadel whispered. This Morty began to hear it in those pauses, as though the walls themselves carried memories. Pipes groaned not only with steam but with sighs. The lamps flickered not only from age but from hesitation, like weary eyes refusing sleep. Even the doors, opening and closing in their constant rhythm, seemed to echo with the sound of arrivals and farewells. To most, it was just noise. To him, it was something else. The Citadel's murmurs were not words, but they were full of feeling. He began to sense the loneliness of halls that stretched too long, the ache of rooms filled with children who looked the same but dreamed differently. He would sit in corners, back against the wall, eyes half closed, simply listening. Others passed by and laughed at him, calling him slow, calling him strange. But he didn't mind. In the quiet, he felt close to something larger, as though the Citadel itself was a living presence trying to confide in him. Sometimes he wondered if he was imagining it. Perhaps the murmurs were only the echoes of his own thoughts reflected back through steel and stone. Yet, the more he listened, the more certain he became. The Citadel was not merely a place, it was a keeper of secrets, holding within its bones the weight of countless Mortys who had passed through, countless Ricks who had built and abandoned, countless unspoken stories that clung like dust in the corners. One evening, as the shift, lamps dimmed into their blue glow, he wandered down a hallway less traveled. It smelled faintly of oil and damp paper, and the air carried a chill that made his skin prickle. There were no guards, no teachers, only silence. The further he walked, the softer the world seemed to become, until even his footsteps hushed themselves. At last, he found himself standing before a broken window, shards still clinging to the frame like frozen tears. Through the gap, he could see the void outside, stars scattered far away, pulsing slowly in the distance. He pressed his hands against the cool edge and felt the faint vibrations of the structure beneath his palms. It was then he realized the Citadel's voice wasn't only in sound, it was in touch, a faint tremor, a low hum like a heartbeat buried deep within steel. He closed his eyes, leaned forward, and for a moment felt as though he belonged to it, not as a prisoner, not as a pawn but as a listener. And in being listened to, the Citadel seemed less lonely. When he opened his eyes, he noticed something else, a small crack running along the floor, thin as a thread. Most would have ignored it, but to him it looked like a path. Kneeling, he traced it with his finger, following its winding line until it disappeared beneath the wall. He wondered how many others had walked this hall without noticing. To him, it was beautiful. A flaw, yes, but a flaw that told a story. The days that followed were filled with more wanderings. Each time he slipped away, he returned with new details. The forgotten hum of old machinery, the way dust settled like snowfall in neglected rooms, the gentle creak of chairs that hadn't been sat on in years. He began to think of these discoveries as gifts, as though the Citadel trusted him enough to reveal its softer side. It was during one of these wanderings that he stumbled upon a room unlike any other. The door was ajar, light spilling faintly from within. When he stepped inside, he found walls covered in sketches, rough, hurried drawings of stars, planets, galaxies. None of them precise, but all of them yearning. Someone had once stood here, trying to capture the sky beyond. The papers were yellowed, curling at the edges, but the ink still glimmered faintly under the lamp. He reached out and touched one of the drawings, tracing the crude outline of a spiral galaxy. Though the lines were simple, they pulsed with something. He recognized longing. Whoever had drawn them had wanted more than calculations, more than power. They had wanted wonder, and in that moment he felt less alone. When he left the room, he carried a piece of paper with him, a small sketch of a star cluster. He folded it gently and hid it inside his pocket. It was not theft, it was remembrance. He promised himself. He would not let the drawing be forgotten, just as he promised himself he would not let the Citadel's whispers go unheard. In the nights that followed, he would unfold the paper and look at it by the dim light of his bunk. The stars on the page were nothing compared to the stars beyond the glass, yet they glowed in his mind with equal weight. The act of someone's hand pressing ink to paper, trying to hold the infinite, it was fragile and beautiful. He often fell asleep with the sketch pressed against his chest, as though it could keep him tethered to something purer than the noise of the Citadel. Others began to notice his strangeness more. They teased him for staring at walls, for carrying scraps of paper, for walking with his head tilted as though listening to something no one else could hear. He smiled softly at their words, but inside he kept his secret close. The Citadel had given him its murmurs, and he would not betray them. One night, as he listened to the faint hum in the pipes above his bunk, he thought about the crack in the hallway, about the forgotten sketches, about the endless stars. All of them were reminders. Nothing, not even a fortress as vast as the Citadel, was unbroken. And perhaps it was in the cracks, in the flaws, in the whispers, that the truest beauty lived. He closed his eyes and drifted into sleep with that thought, the drawing folded neatly beneath his pillow. The Citadel hummed on, carrying the memories of those who had passed, and somewhere in that vast chorus, his small heart joined in, quietly, gently, like a lullaby no one else could hear. There was a Rick who carried his years differently from the others. Most of them seemed sharp-edged, restless, as though time itself had become something to be conquered or defied. But this one walked slowly, shoulders stooped, his eyes not burning, with cleverness but softened by fatigue. He still wore the same white coat, still smelled faintly of metal and chemicals, but his presence was different. When he entered a room, the air did not sharpen, it quieted, as though his very weariness invited gentleness. Morty first noticed him during one of those wandering evenings when his curiosity led him away from the other boys. The old man was sitting on a bench, not working, not lecturing, just sitting with his hands folded loosely in his lap. He was watching the glow of the Citadel's outer lights as if they were stars. Morty slowed his step, uncertain whether to disturb him. Rick's disliked interruptions. Yet there was something about this one's silence that felt less like distance and more like an open doorway. He sat down cautiously at the far end of the bench. The Rick didn't glance at him, didn't scold him, didn't even seem surprised. They shared the silence for a while. Morty let his legs dangle, tapping his shoes lightly against the floor, listening to the faint hum of machinery beneath. He felt the urge to say something but didn't know what. Words often felt clumsy when hearts already understood. At last, the old Rick spoke, his voice low and worn. "You see it too, don't you?" Morty blinked, unsure. "See what?" "The spaces between," the man murmured, his gaze still fixed on the dim horizon. Most folks, they only see the noise, the chaos, but there are gaps, little pauses where the world exhales. I used to sit in them too. Morty's chest tightened. He hadn't known anyone else felt this way. He nodded slowly, as though afraid to break the moment. I notice things sometimes. Small things. I thought it was just me." The Rick chuckled softly, the sound more like a sigh. "It is you, but it's me too. And it was others before us. The Citadel buries us in sameness, but every so often one of us remembers to listen." They fell quiet again, yet the silence was no longer heavy. It was shared, and in that sharing, Morty felt something new stir in him. A bond, fragile, but real, like the thin thread of a lullaby hummed between two voices. In the days that followed, he sought the old Rick more often. He never announced himself, never demanded attention. He would simply sit nearby. Sometimes the Rick spoke, sometimes he didn't. But each time, Morty left with something that felt like wisdom, though it rarely came as lessons. Once, the old man told him, "The stars don't rush. They burn slow and they last." Another time, while fixing a broken tool, he muttered, "Things that break are the things that teach us the most." Morty treasured these fragments like treasures, folding them into the quiet corners of his heart. They weren't instructions or formulas, just gentle reminders that the world had depth beyond what most saw. One evening, Morty brought him half a sandwich. He didn't know why, it simply felt right. The old Rick looked down at it, then up at him, and for the first time his mouth curved into something close to a smile. He took the bread and ate slowly, as though it was more than food. Morty chewed, his half beside him, the two of them sitting in silence once more, yet bound together by that simple act of sharing. The old Rick began to tell him small stories after that. Not grand adventures, not dangerous experiments, just stories of quiet moments he had lived. How he once sat by a lake on a forgotten world, listening to frogs call into the night. How he once repaired a broken radio for a stranger who thanked him not with words, but with a nod. How he once watched a child laugh at nothing at all, and realized joy was lighter than science could ever measure. These stories settled in Morty like seeds, each one sprouting slowly, shaping the way he looked at his own days. He realized then that wisdom was not always in the loud voices, in the bold discoveries, but in the small, unrecorded moments. And though he was young, he began to feel older, as though listening to the old Rick stitched something ancient into him. Not everyone,
Understood.
Other Mortys teased him more for keeping company with an elder, whispering that he was wasting time. But Morty had learned not to be bothered. When he looked at them, he saw their hunger for approval, their fear of being left behind, their restless eyes darting for escape. He felt for them, but he knew his path was different. His heart was not restless. It was searching, yes, but searching for quiet, not escape. One night, as they sat together, the old Rick placed a hand on his shoulder. It was the first time he had touched him, and the weight of it was steady, grounding. "Don't let them harden you," he said softly. "This place has a way of turning hearts to stone. But not yours. Yours. Yours is meant to stay soft," Morty swallowed, unsure how to answer. He didn't always understand the man's words, but he understood his heart, and that was enough. When he returned to his bunk that night, he lay awake, for a long while, hearing the hum of the Citadel like a faint lullaby. He thought about softness, about the cracks in the walls, about sandwiches split in half, about stars that burned slowly. He thought about the old Rick's tired eyes and how they somehow carried more warmth than the sharpest gaze. Before sleep claimed him, he whispered a quiet promise to himself that he would not forget these things, that even if the Citadel pressed harder, even if the noise grew louder, he would keep listening to the spaces between. And with that thought, he drifted into dreams where stars glowed like lanterns in slow motion, where benches faced windows that never ended, and where silence itself spoke in a voice only he could hear. The morning sun filtered weakly through the narrow windows of the palace, casting faint lines of gold across the stone floor. King Kwame Kofi sat in silence on his throne, his thoughts burdened by the weight of the promise he had once broken and the shadow of unrest it had unleashed. His advisers spoke in hushed tones around him, their voices circling with warnings of disloyalty and whispers of rebellion. Yet the king's gaze remained distant, fixed upon the horizon beyond the open doors of the great hall, where clouds gathered as though mimicking the unease in his heart. Queen Nia Amina entered gracefully, her expression both stern and compassionate. She had long been the voice of reason at his side, yet even she could sense the growing distance between her husband and his people. "Kwame," she said softly, her voice carrying through the chamber. "The kingdom is restless because its heart is restless. You cannot ignore the wound of betrayal. It festers until it consumes all." Her words weighed heavily on him. Though he did not reply immediately, the truth in them was undeniable. The broken promise to his childhood friend, Zuberi Taji, haunted him with every passing day. Where once there had been unity, there was now suspicion, and even those closest to him looked upon the king with questioning eyes. In the courtyard below, Zuberi walked among the guards, his presence commanding both respect and unease. He had not forgotten the broken vow, nor had he forgiven it. Though he remained outwardly loyal, his silence held more power than open defiance. Many of the people admired him for his honesty and strength, whispering that he was the voice of truth the kingdom desperately needed. Zuberi himself did not seek the throne, but his wounded honor had become a banner others rallied behind. That evening, as the kingdom prepared for a festival meant to restore unity, Osei Kwaku, the young scribe, observed the unfolding tension with sharp eyes. He noticed how Amatse, the priestess, lingered close to Zuberi, offering him counsel with words laced with both caution and encouragement. "The gods see everything," she told him quietly. "And when a promise is broken, the balance must be restored, whether by forgiveness or by judgment." The festival began with music and dance, but beneath the rhythm of drums lay an undercurrent of fear. The people celebrated, yet their eyes shifted constantly toward the king and Zuberi, waiting for some sign of reconciliation or conflict. King Kwame, dressed in royal robes of deep blue and gold, approached Zuberi at the heart of the courtyard. The crowd fell into silence. Silence. "Brother," Kwame began, his voice heavy with emotion, "I wronged you once, and in doing so, I wronged the kingdom. I cannot undo the past, but I can offer what is left of my honor. Stand with me, not against me, and let us heal what has been broken." Zuberi's eyes hardened, though a flicker of sorrow passed across his face. He said nothing, allowing the silence to grow thick between them. It was Adama Bako, the elder, who finally stepped forward, leaning on his staff. A king who admits his fault is rare, but words alone will not mend the breach. Action must follow, for without it, promises are nothing more than wind. The crowd murmured in agreement, their faith wavering between hope and doubt. The moment stretched, fragile as glass, and all knew that the path chosen next would shape the fate of Asantaman for generations to come. The kingdom of Asantaman was slowly sinking into unease, though its people tried to go about their daily lives as if nothing had changed. The laughter in the markets was softer, the drums of celebration were fewer, and the watchful eyes of soldiers patrolled where none had stood before. King Kwame Kofi, though outwardly calm, felt the growing distance between himself and his people. Every night he looked out from the palace balcony, staring at the village fires burning in the distance, wondering whether those flames carried warmth or anger against him. Queen Nia Amina, sensing her husband's burden, tried to speak reason into him. She reminded him that a king's strength was not in his crown alone, but in the trust of his people. Yet Kwame, torn between pride and fear, could not easily accept her words. He was haunted by the memory of Zuberi Taji, once his closest friend, now his fiercest rival. What troubled him most was not Zuberi's rebellion, but the promise he had broken, a promise of brotherhood that once bound their lives together. In the villages, whispers spread like wildfire. Old women spoke in hushed tones at the riverside, telling tales of kings who broke their word and invited ruin upon themselves. Hunters around the fires muttered that the spirits were angry, that Asantaman's soil would not bless its harvest if the king did not make amends. Children, who once shouted Kwame's name in play, now mimicked the sound of clashing swords, pretending to fight against the king's men. Zuberi Taji, meanwhile, moved like a shadow through the forests. His loyal band grew stronger, not by numbers, alone, but by faith. They believed his cause was just, that a man who once fought for the kingdom's freedom had now been betrayed by the very throne he had defended. At night, their chants echoed through the trees, carried by the wind until even the palace guards heard them. It was not just rebellion that Zuberi carried, it was the soul of the people demanding justice. Amatse, the village elder, found herself caught between two worlds. She respected the throne but could not ignore the pain in the hearts of her people. In secret, she met with Osei Kwaku and Adama Bako, speaking of omens in the skies, of dreams that foretold a storm. She warned them that if King Kwame did not humble himself soon, the kingdom would be torn apart not by swords alone, but by the wrath of forgotten promises. And so, as the moon rose over Asantaman, casting its silver light across the land, the kingdom waited. Some waited with hope, others with anger, and some with fear. But all knew that the bond between a king and his people had been cracked, and cracks, if left untended, could break even the strongest of walls. The festival of harvest arrived with great joy in Asantaman. Drums echoed through the valleys, and the air smelled of roasted yam, honey, and palm wine. Villagers decorated the streets with bright fabrics, while children danced with clay masks painted in vivid colors. To the people it was a day of celebration, but to King Kwame Kofi it carried a heavier weight. It was the day he had to show his kingdom that despite whispers of betrayal, the throne still stood firm and unshaken. Queen Nia Amina stood beside him on the royal dais, her eyes calm but full of quiet fire. She had been hearing rumors spreading like wild grass that Zuberi Taji had been spotted near the borders, gathering men of shadow, whispering rebellion. Though the queen never let fear show, she knew something sinister moved beneath the joyful surface of the festival. Kofi Oba, the loyal general, had tightened the palace guards. He doubled patrols, placed watchers in the crowd, and instructed every warrior to keep their spears sharp and their eyes sharper. Yet, even in his vigilance, he knew Zuberi's cunning was like smoke, impossible to catch until it suffocated the room. As the drums reached their peak, the king rose and raised his staff. "My people," his voice thundered over the crowd, "today we celebrate the blessings of harvest, the bond of community, and the strength of our kingdom. May the gods continue to protect us." The crowd cheered, the sound rolling like a wave across the land. But hidden in the cheer were shadows waiting for their moment. From the back of the festival, Amatse, the healer, stood uneasily. Her visions had returned. She saw flickers of fire, blood staining the soil, and the face of Zuberi painted in anger. She whispered to herself, "The promise broken." The brother turned. Though she longed to run to the king, the weight of destiny kept her frozen. Prophecies, she knew, were not to be meddled with, but endured. Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the west gate of the festival grounds. A group of cloaked figures pushed through the crowd. Panic spread as one of them hurled a small clay pot onto the ground, bursting into thick smoke. Screams filled the air, and people scattered in chaos. Kofi Oba and his warriors rushed forward, spears raised. "Protect the king!" he roared, slashing through the smoke. Out of the haze stepped Zuberi Taji, his eyes burning like coal, his blade gleaming with intent. "Kwame." Zuberi's voice carried rage and pain in equal measure. "You broke your word to me. You sit on the throne built by our blood, yet you cast me aside like a shadow. Today, the kingdom will know who the true heir of destiny is." King Kwame Kofi tightened his grip on the staff, his voice steady, though his heart ached. "Zuberi, you are my brother. The promise we made was sacred, but so is the oath I swore to my people. Do not do this." But Zuberi only laughed bitterly. "Your people? They were mine too until you blinded them with lies." With that, he lunged. The clash of steel against staff rang through the festival square. Warriors clashed with rebels, screams mingling with the sound of drums that had now turned into war cries. Dust rose into the sky as the earth itself seemed to tremble at the betrayal unfolding. Adama Bako, the young scribe, who had been documenting the harvest rituals, found himself caught in the chaos. He ducked behind a cart, clutching his parchment. His hands shook, yet he could not stop writing. He knew history was being carved into blood and smoke, and it was his duty to record every breath of it. Queen Nia Amina rushed to the edge of the dais, calling out to the warriors, "Stand firm! Do not let fear take root." Her presence, regal and commanding, rallied the people who had begun to flee. Mothers grabbed their children, but many stayed, watching in horror as brothers became enemies. Amatse, guided by her visions, pushed through the crowd until she reached the battlefield. Her voice rose above the clash. "Zuberi, stop this madness! The gods do not bless a hand raised against kin. The path you walk will only lead to ruin." For a moment Zuberi hesitated, her words clawing at the fragments of his humanity. But his rage was too deep, his heart too poisoned by the thought of betrayal. With a roar, he swung his blade again, narrowly missing the king's shoulder. Kofi Oba lunged forward, intercepting the strike, his spear clashing against Zuberi's sword. "If you wish to touch the king, you must go through me first," he shouted. The two men locked in fierce combat, their movements quick, precise, deadly. In the background, villagers began to chant the king's name, trying to drown out the fear rising in their chests. The sound gave Kwame strength. He raised his staff high, the golden tip glowing in the sunlight. With one mighty swing, he struck the earth, sending a shockwave that threw men off their feet. Silence followed, heavy and suffocating. Zuberi staggered back, eyes wide with disbelief. "You would use the power of the gods against me? Against your own blood?" Kwame's chest heaved, his face etched with sorrow. "I did not choose this path, Zuberi. You did." The rebels, shaken and leaderless, began to retreat into the shadows. Some dropped their weapons, others fled into the forest. But Zuberi did not move. He stood, trembling with fury and despair, his sword still raised, though his men were gone. Queen Nia stepped down from the dais, her voice like steel. "Enough. This kingdom has bled too many times for pride. Brother against brother must not become our legacy." But Zuberi's eyes burned with a darkness too deep to quench. He pointed his sword at the king and hissed, "This is not the end. The gods themselves cannot protect you forever. I will return, and when I do, your throne will fall." With that, he vanished into the smoke, leaving only silence behind. The festival lay in ruins, broken stalls, scattered offerings, frightened villagers. Yet the king still stood, staff in hand, his people rallying around him. Though the battle was won, every soul knew it was only the beginning of a storm that would test the kingdom like never before. King Kwame Kofi looked to the sky, the sun dimmed by smoke. His heart was heavy, not with victory, but with the sorrow of a brother lost. And deep within him, he wondered if the kingdom could truly survive the wrath of Zuberi Taji. The moon hung heavy above Asantaman, casting its silver glow upon the land, as though it wished to wash away the growing unrest. Inside the palace, King Kwame Kofi sat alone in his chamber, his hand resting on the carved armrest of his throne, though no one else was present. The weight of his broken promise to Zuberi, Taji gnawed at him like a silent vulture, picking at his spirit piece by piece. His heart wanted to reach out, to mend what was broken, but his pride held him in chains, far stronger than any forged by men. Queen Nia Amina entered quietly, her steps soft, her presence a calming force in the storm that had overtaken the king's mind. She watched him for a long moment before speaking. "You are not yourself, Kwame," she said softly, her voice like water upon stone. "Your people sense it, and so do I. The weight of unkept words is heavy, heavier than even the crown you wear." The king's jaw tightened. "What would you have me do, Nia?" he asked, his tone carrying both frustration and despair. "If I bend now. If I admit fault, would I not be seen as weak? The kingdom needs strength, not apologies. Strength is not the absence of humility, she replied. It is the courage to acknowledge when one has strayed from the path. Even a king cannot outrun his word, for his word is his kingdom. Kwame turned his face away, but her words pierced him deeply. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the sound of the night winds brushing against the carved windows. Outside the palace walls, whispers of discontent stirred among the people. Traders spoke in hushed tones, elders exchanged worried glances, and even the guards felt the shift in the air. Zuberi Taji had not spoken openly, but his silence carried more weight than the loudest accusations. The promise broken between him and the king was becoming a shadow over Asanteman, spreading doubt like smoke. In the village, Zuberi sat by the fire with Osei Kwaku and Amatse. His eyes were steady, his posture firm, but there was pain etched upon his features. "I gave my trust to a friend, a king," he murmured, "and in return, I was left to stand alone." Amma reached for his hand. "But you are not alone, Zuberi. The people see, the people know. Truth needs no trumpet. It speaks for itself." Osi added, his voice sharp but loyal. "A king who forgets his word forgets the heart of his people. Asanteman was built on bonds stronger than gold. If that bond weakens, so too does the kingdom." The night grew deeper, and the firelight flickered across their faces, casting shadows that seemed to move with the weight of their conversation. Zuberi did not speak again, but in his silence a storm was forming, one that even the strongest walls of the palace might not contain. Back within the palace, Kwame Kofi lay awake, his mind tormented. He recalled the day he had made the promise, the sincerity in Zuberi's eyes, the brotherhood they once shared. To break such a bond was not just a betrayal of a man, but of himself. His heart wavered, caught between the chains of pride and the call of honor. The moon continued its watchful gaze, cold and unyielding, as if waiting to see which path the king of Asanteman would choose, redemption or ruin. The sun dipped below the horizon, bathing Asanteman in shades of crimson and gold. The kingdom was silent, as if it too held its breath, waiting for what would unfold. King Kwame Kofi sat alone in his chamber, his crown resting on the table beside him. For the first time in years, he looked less like a ruler and more like a weary man burdened by choices. He thought of Zuberi Taji's words, of Amatse's pleas, and of Osei Kwaku's loyalty. All their voices echoed in his mind, demanding an answer he could no longer delay. In the courtyard, Queen Nia Amina walked slowly, her hands folded together, whispering prayers to the ancestors. Her heart ached for her husband, but she also feared the path he had chosen. "A king who forgets his promises," she whispered, "forgets the gods who gave him his throne." She felt the weight of what tomorrow would bring, knowing peace in the kingdom balanced on the edge of a blade. Meanwhile, Zuberi Taji prepared in silence. His eyes no longer burned with anger, but with a cold resolve. He sharpened his blade, not for war, but as a reminder of the oath broken against him. Amatse watched from the shadows, her spirit torn between love for her king and loyalty to her people. She prayed that dawn would not demand blood, but deep in her heart she sensed fate had already decided. Night fell heavy and still. The torches around the palace flickered, their flames dancing like restless spirits. King Kwame Kofi stood at the balcony, gazing at the stars. He spoke softly, as if the heavens might answer. "If I have erred, may the ancestors guide my hand tomorrow. If I must pay, let it be in truth." His words carried into the wind, swallowed by the silence of the sleeping kingdom. As dawn approached, the first sound of drums echoed from the Wetu hills. It was not the drums of celebration, but of warning. Every villager awoke to the sound, hearts pounding, eyes wide with fear. The promise broken had rippled through the land, and now destiny called for reckoning. The king tightened his cloak around his shoulders, ready to face the day that would either restore honor or take everything from him. The morning air was sharp and heavy with tension. Asanteman's streets, usually bustling with life, were empty. Windows remained shuttered, and even the livestock seemed to sense the unease. King Kwame Kofi stepped from the palace, his steps echoing on the stone floor of the courtyard. Soldiers lined the path, eyes alert, but even they could not hide the fear that clung to the air. He could feel every gaze of his people, some filled with hope, others with judgment, all waiting for his decision. Zuberi Taji appeared on the ridge overlooking the city, his figure tall and commanding. His followers, hidden among the trees, mirrored his calm determination. Unlike the king, they were not anxious. Their hearts beat in unison with the rhythm of justice and retribution, driven by the belief that the kingdom deserved truth over titles. Amatse's voice, carried on the wind, seemed to whisper warnings and prayers simultaneously, reminding all present that destiny could be tempered by wisdom or shattered by pride. King Kwame raised his hand, signaling his guards to lower their weapons. The city's gates opened slowly, revealing villagers who stepped forward cautiously, some clutching children, others holding tools of work rather than war. The silence was absolute, heavy enough to feel like a physical weight pressing on every soul present. He descended from the palace steps, each footfall a testament to the burden he bore. Zuberi advanced cautiously, keeping the distance but maintaining eye contact with the king. His voice rang out, calm yet firm, echoing across the square. "Your reign has been tainted by betrayal. The people demand the truth." King Kwame Kofi's chest tightened as he felt the magnitude of his past decisions pressing upon him. For a long moment, neither spoke, only the wind moving through the open square and the subtle rustle of leaves marking the passage of time. Finally, Kwame lifted his head, speaking clearly, without hesitation. "I have wronged those I swore to protect. I have allowed pride to cloud my judgment. Today, I offer not excuses, but accountability." The words carried like a ripple through the crowd. Murmurs spread, some skeptical, others hopeful. Zuberi's gaze softened just slightly, as if recognizing the sincerity in the king's voice. The tension remained, fragile as a spider's web. Both men knew that what followed would define Asanteman for generations to come. It was not only a test of strength, but a trial of hearts, loyalty, and wisdom. The dawn was breaking fully now, golden rays casting light over the square, illuminating the faces of all who had gathered. In that moment, every soul in Asanteman felt the weight of history pressing upon them, and for the first time in many seasons, there was a quiet hope that justice, tempered with mercy, might yet prevail. The square remained tense, the air thick with anticipation. King Kwame Kofi stood firmly, facing Zuberi Taji, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. The villagers watched silently, the morning sun casting long shadows that seemed to stretch like fingers across the ground. Every eye was fixed on the two men, knowing that the next actions would determine the kingdom's fate. Soldiers shifted uneasily, sensing the fragility of the moment, while the distant mountains echoed with the faint cries of birds disturbed from their nests. Zuberi stepped closer, his expression unreadable. "Words alone cannot restore what has been broken," he said, his voice carrying authority, yet tinged with restraint. He drew a small blade, not in threat, but as a symbol, a reminder of the promises that had been ignored. Kwame's fingers tightened around the hilt of his own ceremonial sword. The weight of it felt heavier than ever, burdened with the mistakes of years past. He could feel the eyes of ancestors in every carving and tapestry within the palace behind him, urging him toward wisdom and courage. Amatse's soft voice rose above the murmurs, pleading for calm. She stepped forward, hands outstretched, her presence a bridge between the king and the challenger. "Violence will solve nothing," she warned, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "The people need guidance, not blood. Let truth be the sword that strikes here." Her words seemed to hang in the air, fragile yet potent, giving both men pause. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Kwame lowered his weapon slightly, signaling his willingness to listen, to face the consequences, rather than react with pride. Zuberi's gaze softened, respect and caution mingling as he too adjusted his stance. The tension that gripped the square slowly began to shift, replaced with a strange stillness, as though the kingdom itself was exhaling. The villagers murmured, sensing a turning point. One by one they stepped closer, their collective presence, a silent demand for reconciliation. The drums from the ridge, once a call to arms, fell silent, replaced by the gentle rustling of leaves and the soft cries of children awakening to the new day. King Kwame Kofi raised his voice, steady and unwavering. "I will answer for every mistake. I will right the wrongs where I can. And I will do so not as a king above you, but as one among you." Zuberi nodded slowly, sheathing his blade. "Then, let the people witness that a promise broken can be mended, not with vengeance, but with courage." The crowd exhaled as one, the tension breaking like a wave retreating from the shore. In that moment, a Santaman felt the fragile balance of justice and mercy, the first step toward healing a kingdom that had been shaken to its core. The morning sun bathed a Santaman in a gentle light, softening the scars of the previous day. King Kwame Kofi moved among his people, listening to their concerns, offering words of reassurance. Villagers who had been hesitant now approached him, their eyes reflecting cautious hope. Children ran freely, their laughter breaking the lingering tension, while elders nodded in approval at the king's humility. It was a delicate balance, a kingdom slowly learning to breathe again after a period of fear and uncertainty. Amatse walked beside Kwame, her presence a calming influence. She held his arm lightly, a reminder of the bonds that connected the rulers, not just to power, but to their people. "Healing takes time," she whispered, her voice carrying wisdom and patience. "Every choice you make now will echo for generations." Kwame nodded, feeling the weight of her words. The reconciliation was not merely between him and Zuberi, Taji, but among all who had felt the sting of betrayal. Zuberi himself worked to rebuild trust, speaking openly with villagers and soldiers alike. His demeanor had softened, tempered by the knowledge that justice was not merely punishment, but understanding and accountability. He oversaw repairs to buildings damaged during past disputes, organized gatherings to share resources, and encouraged open dialogue among communities previously divided. Slowly, the fear that had once gripped hearts began to loosen its hold. In the palace, advisors and officials convened to address lingering issues. Decisions were made transparently with input from representatives of each village. This new approach fostered a sense of unity that had long been absent. Every decree was tempered by counsel, every action weighed against its potential impact on the people. King Kwame Kofi felt a renewed sense of purpose, realizing that true leadership was not about absolute authority, but about earning respect through integrity. As night fell, the kingdom gathered in the main square. Fires were lit, casting warm, dancing light across faces filled with cautious optimism. Music and storytelling returned, the arts once again weaving the fabric of a society eager to move forward. Kwame stood at the center, flanked by Amatse and Zuberi, acknowledging the people with a solemn nod. There was no fanfare, no grand speeches, only the quiet affirmation that the kingdom had endured, and in enduring had begun to heal. The stars emerged overhead, mirrored by the flickering flames below, a reminder that even after darkness, light could return. A Santaman, scarred but steadfast, looked toward the future, its people bound by the shared experience of hardship, reconciliation, and hope. Every heart beat with the awareness that while mistakes could not be erased, they could guide the kingdom toward wisdom and compassion. In this fragile harmony, the seeds of a stronger, more unified Asantaman were carefully sown. The first festival of unity dawned with an air of excitement that had not been felt in Asantaman for many years. Banners in vibrant colors fluttered across the streets, and the scent of roasted yams and spiced meat filled the air. Villagers decorated their homes with handmade ornaments, while children practiced dances in the squares, their movements full of anticipation. Even the elders, usually reserved in public, joined in preparations, offering advice on traditions and rituals that honored both the past and the present. King Kwame Kofi and Amatse walked through the main thoroughfare, greeting their people with humility and warmth. The king's presence was no longer met with caution, but with smiles and genuine affection. Merchants called out, offering small gifts of fruit and woven cloth, and musicians tuned their instruments for the procession. Zuberi Taji oversaw the organization of events, ensuring that each village had representation and that no community felt overlooked. The spirit of collaboration, once fragile, had taken root. At the central square, a stage was erected where storytelling, singing, and dancing would take place. The first performance recounted the history of Asantaman, reminding the people of their shared struggles and triumphs. Children dressed in traditional attire performed plays that dramatized lessons of courage, loyalty, and forgiveness. Their laughter echoed through the square, blending with the melodies of flutes, drums, and stringed instruments. The crowd clapped in rhythm, united in celebration. As the day progressed, competitions were held, wrestling matches, foot races, and tests of skill in weaving and crafting. Villagers cheered each participant, emphasizing sportsmanship over rivalry. Even Zuberi, once seen as stern and unyielding, joined a friendly contest of archery, eliciting laughter from children and adults alike. Amatse watched with quiet pride, noting how joy and camaraderie were becoming the foundation of a healed society. When evening fell, torches illuminated the streets and the final ceremony began. King Kwame Kofi addressed the crowd, his voice steady yet gentle. He spoke of unity, trust, and the power of forgiveness, reminding everyone that the kingdom's strength lay not in its walls or treasures, but in its people. Fire dancers performed in mesmerizing patterns, and the night sky became a canvas for fireworks that painted vibrant streaks of red, gold, and blue. Music, laughter, and applause filled the air, echoing the heartbeat of a kingdom reborn. The festival ended with families gathering around fires, sharing meals, and recounting stories of their ancestors. The sense of belonging and hope lingered, settling into the hearts of all who had participated. Asantiman had not only celebrated unity but had forged it anew, proving that even after deep turmoil, a community bound by understanding and respect could flourish. In the quiet moments that followed, King Kwame Kofi looked at his people and felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The festival was more than a celebration. It was a promise of a brighter, harmonious future. The morning air in Asantiman was crisp, carrying with it the faint scent of dew and smoke from the evening fires. The Festival of Unity had left a lingering warmth in the hearts of the people, but beneath that calm, an unease began to creep. Small signs were easy to overlook: a gate left slightly ajar, a patrol returning late from its rounds, and whispers in the marketplace that spoke of shadows moving where no shadow should be. King Kwame Kofi, despite his usual confidence, sensed the subtle shift. He had learned that peace, while precious, was fragile, and vigilance was as essential as celebration. Amatse noticed it first. While inspecting the palace gardens, she observed footprints near the eastern wall, unusual in shape and direction, suggesting more than a wandering animal. They led toward the royal stables, but disappeared midway, as if the intruder had vanished into thin air. She immediately informed Zuberi Taji, who, despite his jovial mood after the festival, grew serious. "We cannot ignore this, Amma," he said. "Our peace has been hard won, but not all hearts are aligned with our vision." Word spread quickly. The guards increased their patrols, villagers were asked to remain vigilant, and secret messengers were sent to neighboring villages to report any strange activity. King Kwame Kofi convened a council meeting in the royal hall, inviting Amatse, Zuberi Taji, and a few trusted elders. "We celebrate unity, yet we must prepare for threats that seek to undo what we have built," he said. His voice, though calm, carried an urgency that commanded attention. Maps were spread across the long table, marking every village, road, and boundary. Strategies were debated, from reinforcing watchtowers to setting discreet patrols along the kingdom's perimeters. Meanwhile, in the shadowed corners of Asantiman, a figure observed the palace from a distance. Cloaked in dark fabric and moving with calculated silence, the intruder had no intention of being noticed. Every detail of the festival had been carefully watched, and the vulnerabilities of the kingdom catalogued. The figure's eyes lingered on the eastern wall where Amatse had discovered the footprints, and a quiet determination settled in. This was no ordinary trespasser. It was someone who understood the significance of striking at the right moment. Back at the palace, Amatse and Zuberi conducted a thorough inspection of the eastern sector. They discovered minor signs of tampering with the gates and slight wear on the wooden beams, evidence that someone had been practicing or preparing for an entry. Zuberi frowned. "These are not the works of petty thieves," he said. "This is calculated. Someone is testing our defenses, learning our routines." Amatse nodded gravely. "Then we must outsmart them before they can strike. Knowledge alone is not enough. We need action." The days that followed were tense. The people of Asantiman continued their daily lives, but a watchful eye had been cast over every road and every alley. Scouts reported strange figures near the borders, often disappearing before they could be confronted. Rumors began to swirl among villagers, some speaking of a hidden faction seeking revenge for old grievances, others whispering about outsiders drawn by tales of the kingdom's wealth and newfound harmony. The uncertainty weighed heavily on King Kwame Kofi. He could not ignore the unrest, yet he refused to let fear dictate the lives of his people. One night, under a sky veiled with clouds, Amatse awoke to a faint noise near the palace's eastern gate. She quietly woke Suberi, who had stationed himself nearby, and they approached together, their footsteps silent on the stone path. A shadow flitted across the courtyard, stopping briefly to observe the main building. Amatse's heart raced, but she remained steady. "We follow carefully," she whispered. "No rash moves. We must know who we are dealing with." The figure slipped toward the stables, moving with uncanny precision. Amatse and Zuberi followed at a distance, using the darkness as cover. As they approached, they noticed subtle signs of sabotage, ropes cut, a loose lock, and faint chalk marks on the walls indicating timing or sequence. The intruder had been mapping the palace for days, anticipating every movement. Zuberi's eyes narrowed. "This is beyond simple thievery," he murmured. "This is espionage. And not just for wealth. This is strategic, meant to weaken us from within." The next morning, King Kwame Kofi called for the council once more. Amatse and Zuberi reported their findings, showing the marks and damages they had discovered. The king listened carefully, weighing each detail. "We have celebrated and our people trust us," he said, "but trust alone cannot defend us. We must act decisively without instilling fear and without revealing our full hand to this enemy." Plans were made to reinforce the eastern sector, train additional guards, and set subtle traps to observe and identify the intruder without direct confrontation. At the same time, the hidden figure continued its surveillance, unaware that their every move was being watched. They marked weaknesses, observed routines, and noted the positions of patrols. Yet for every strategy they devised, the kingdom seemed to respond with quiet resilience. The figure began to sense the intelligence and resourcefulness of Asanteman's defenders. There was a subtle admiration in their careful movements, but also an impatience. They had waited too long for the right opportunity, and now timing was critical. 3 nights later, under the cover of a moonless sky, the intruder made the first overt attempt. 2 minor fires were set near storage buildings at the edge of the eastern sector. The alarm was raised quickly and guards acted immediately to extinguish the flames. The intruder's plan to create distraction and chaos had failed, but it confirmed the identity of the threat as someone with knowledge of the palace layout and daily routines. Amatse and Zuberi reviewed the evidence carefully, finding markings left behind, likely as a signature or message. "They want us to know they are watching," Amatse noted. "This is psychological warfare as much as physical." King Kwame Kofi knew that waiting for a larger strike could be catastrophic. He called for a discreet summit with loyal elders and commanders to devise a strategy that would neutralize the threat without alarming the general population. Messages were sent to scouts beyond the borders, requesting intelligence on any strangers or suspicious groups moving through the surrounding forests. The palace was reorganized subtly, with guard rotations changed and double watches placed. At key points, the kingdom's response was invisible but thorough, reflecting wisdom and foresight rather than panic. Meanwhile, the intruder's frustration grew. Each attempt at causing disruption was met with careful anticipation, and the silent observation from Amatse and Zuberi remained undetected. They began to consider bolder moves, questioning the intelligence they had relied upon. Could there be a traitor among the kingdom's people? Were there spies they had not yet discovered? The figure began to rethink their approach, knowing that a direct confrontation would now carry significant risk. The stakes had risen beyond initial intent. A Santaman was no longer an easy target. In the following weeks, a sense of tension settled over the kingdom, but outwardly life continued as normal. Villagers attended markets, children played in the squares, and artisans worked on their crafts, unaware of the silent war unfolding around them. King Kwame Kofi made personal visits, encouraging his people, showing that leadership was not just about command, but about presence and reassurance. Amatse coordinated with Zuberi, devising subtle means of monitoring and documenting suspicious activity. Each night, the shadowy figure's movements were anticipated, yet they always remained just out of reach, maintaining the thrill and danger of their clandestine mission. Finally, after a month of observation, Amatse noticed a pattern. The intruder was not random. They operated with strict timing, avoiding large crowds and often choosing moments when patrols were thinnest. Using this knowledge, she and Zuberi set a careful trap, concealed signals, false routes, and decoy storage areas. When the intruder approached, expecting minimal resistance, they were met with a combination of observation and careful containment, preventing harm while revealing their identity. The confrontation was tense. Amatse stepped forward from the shadows, her voice calm but firm. "Your actions have been noted," she said. The figure froze, realizing they had been outmaneuvered. Zuberi emerged as well, flanking the intruder with careful authority. The intruder's intent was revealed, a rival faction from a distant ET region seeking to exploit a Santaman's prosperity, believing the kingdom unprepared. Their strategy had failed not due to force, but because of the intelligence, planning, and unity of the kingdom itself. King Kwame Kofi addressed the captured intruder later that day. "We value life and justice," he said. "But threats to our people cannot go unchallenged. Let this be a lesson. Strength lies not in fear, but in vigilance, wisdom, and unity." The intruder, understanding the futility of their plans, was given a fair trial under the laws of a Santaman, ensuring that justice was served without cruelty. The resolution of this threat reinforced a vital truth. Even in peace, the kingdom's strength depended on the alertness and collaboration of its people. Amatse and Zuberi were celebrated for their courage and foresight, but both knew that the kingdom's ongoing prosperity required more than celebration. It required constant care, humility, and vigilance. In the quiet that followed, a Santaman returned to its daily rhythms, but the lesson lingered. Peace was precious, but it was not passive. Trust and harmony needed protection, and the strength of a kingdom was measured not just by its defenses, but by the unity, wisdom, and courage of its people. King Kwame Kofi gazed over his kingdom, aware that challenges would arise, but confident that a Santaman, forged through struggle and sustained by loyalty, could endure any trial that lay ahead. The air was quiet that evening, a gentle hum of distant machines and rustling leaves weaving together a lullaby that only the city seemed to know. Morty walked slowly along the edges of the Citadel, where the streets curved in impossible loops and neon signs glimmered like soft stars in a universe just slightly out of reach. He often felt that these streets were alive, not with the hustle of the citizens, but with memory, as if every corner had absorbed whispers of laughter, regret, and fleeting wonder over centuries. Tonight, the air felt heavier, charged with an unspoken curiosity that tugged at him. It was the kind of silence that invited thought, that made one realize how much the world could unfold in slow, quiet breaths. He stopped at a small fountain. Tucked between two towering apartment complexes, the water shimmering under the soft glow of streetlights. It was peaceful here, almost sacred, as though the Citadel had carved out a secret corner for moments like this. Morty sat on the stone edge, watching the water ripple and listening to the distant echo of voices, muffled yet melodic. He felt a strange comfort in this quiet, a reminder that even in a universe constantly in motion, stillness could be found. His thoughts wandered to Rick, to the countless adventures that had once pulled him across dimensions, leaving him exhausted but alive. And yet tonight, Morty realized that some of the most important journeys weren't through space, they were through reflection, through understanding the small threads that connected one life to another. A soft breeze carried a faint scent of roasted nuts and caramel drifting from a nearby vendor cart that seemed to appear only at night. Morty smiled faintly, feeling a memory rise unbidden. There had been nights like this when he and Rick would sit under a dim street lamp, sharing silent sandwiches, listening to nothing in particular, but feeling everything. It was in those quiet moments, when words were unnecessary, that he had understood the subtle language of love, friendship, and care. That language lingered even now in the folds of his memory. Morty reached out, letting the wind tousle his hair, and for a moment he imagined Rick beside him, sharing a small, knowing grin. As he walked on, he noticed an old bookshop, tucked into an alley he had passed many times but never truly seen. Its windows glowed warmly, inviting yet mysterious. Inside, rows of books whispered promises of countless worlds, waiting patiently for someone to listen. Morty's curiosity, always gently tugging at the corners of his mind, led him in. The scent of aged paper and ink wrapped around him like a soft blanket, and he wandered through the narrow aisles, fingers brushing against spines that hummed with quiet histories. Some books seemed ordinary, while others radiated an almost tangible warmth, as though the stories inside recognized the wanderer who held them. Morty's gaze fell upon a thin volume, its cover a muted green with a faint shimmer he couldn't place. As he opened it, the pages seemed to sigh, releasing fragments of memories not entirely his own. The words spoke of worlds within worlds, of lives intertwined in gentle harmony and subtle sorrow. He realized that he could read them not just with his eyes, but with his heart, each sentence resonating like a quiet echo from his own experiences. The book didn't tell of grand battles or cosmic crises. Instead, it spoke of small kindnesses, of moments when a glance or a smile changed the course of a life. Morty felt an unexpected warmth, a soft reassurance that even in vast, unpredictable universes, gentle goodness endured. Leaving the bookshop, Morty wandered toward a quieter part of the Citadel, a sector lined with low, old buildings and narrow, winding streets. Here, the night air seemed thicker, filled with the soft hum of distant conversations and the occasional bell from a forgotten clock tower. He thought about the people he had seen today, about the subtle interactions he had almost overlooked. A merchant handing a coin back to a child, an elderly pair sharing a whispered joke, a student sitting alone, quietly sketching the night sky. Morty realized that the true pulse of the Citadel wasn't in the grand councils or the bustling markets. It was in these small, unrecorded moments of connection. He paused at a bridge that overlooked a silent canal, watching the water mirror the scattered lights above. Morty imagined the countless reflections that had passed through this spot over the centuries, hopes, fears, dreams, regrets, all swirling quietly beneath the surface. He leaned against the railing, letting his thoughts drift. In this gentle solitude, Morty felt a deep sense of gratitude, not for the extraordinary adventures he had survived, but for the quiet persistence of life, for the subtle warmth of everyday existence. Sometimes he realized heroism wasn't about grand gestures or cosmic salvation. It was about noticing, about caring, about being present in the small, fleeting moments that stitched together the fabric of a life. A soft chime echoed from a nearby tower, marking the passage of time, though it felt almost ceremonial rather than urgent. Morty closed his eyes and breathed slowly, letting the calm of the night settle into him. He remembered a lesson Rick had once imparted, spoken in an uncharacteristically quiet moment, that the universe was vast and often indifferent, but within that vastness, small acts of care and understanding created pockets of meaning that endured far longer than any explosion or invention. Morty felt that truth now more vividly than ever. Life, he realized, was a gentle mosaic, stitched together by quiet choices, fleeting compassion, and the soft acknowledgement of others' hearts. Continuing his walk, he found a small park nearly hidden behind ivy-covered walls. Benches lined a narrow path, and a single lamp-post flickered lazily in the breeze. Morty sat again, letting the night embrace him, feeling the cool grass beneath his hands. He watched the stars above, their light faint but persistent, distant yet familiar. Each star seemed like a small promise, a reminder that even when things seemed dark, something enduring existed. Morty's thoughts drifted to his own subtle powers, the abilities he had discovered in the Citadel that allowed him to see beyond the obvious, to feel the unspoken, to understand without words. These gifts were quiet, almost invisible, but they had changed him profoundly, shaping his perspective, teaching him the value of empathy, patience, and careful observation. The night deepened, softening the world into gentle shadows and half-light. Morty felt a quiet swell of serenity as he rose from the bench and walked toward home, each step deliberate, savoring the unhurried rhythm of the streets. He realized that the Citadel, with all its infinite complexity, could be overwhelming. Yet in moments like these, he glimpsed a fragile, enduring harmony. Life, with all its chaos and unpredictability, could be tender, even poetic, if one learned to notice the subtle currents beneath its surface. As he approached his apartment, Morty glanced once more at the quiet streets and the soft luminescence of the neon signs. He felt a gentle awe, a reflective calm that settled warmly in his chest. In the solitude of night, he understood that he had been given not just experiences, but the capacity to witness, to feel, to connect, and in that understanding, there was peace, a quiet assurance that though the universe stretched endlessly around him, small acts of awareness and kindness mattered, lingering like soft echoes long after the moment had passed. Morty stepped inside, carrying that quiet knowledge with him, letting it wrap around his mind like a comforting lullaby, ready to drift into sleep. The echoes of the night still whispering softly in his ears. The world outside his small window had become a quiet rhythm like the heartbeat of some distant, patient giant. Rick's absence left a strange sort of calm in the air, and Morty found himself wandering corridors of thought he had once hurried past, eager to escape. Now each step felt like a careful, deliberate pulse, a gentle acknowledgement that the world could be observed and felt without rushing, without fear. The glow from the streetlights poured in, illuminating dust motes like tiny, suspended stars, and Morty breathed them in as if they were fragments of forgotten dreams. In those moments, He realized the universe had a kind of softness, one that didn't demand answers or explanations. He wandered past the lab's old, humming consoles, the screens black and quiet, their usual chaos absent, and he could almost hear Rick's absence as a gentle hum, an almost musical space where thought could settle. There was a notebook on, a desk half open, pages curling slightly at the corners. He didn't know if Rick meant for him to find it, or if it had simply been left behind, but he flipped it open anyway. The scribbled formulas and doodles looked like the ramblings of some mad poet, yet there was an odd tenderness to them, a quiet, hidden laughter in the margins. Morty ran his fingers over the ink and felt an unexpected connection. It was as if Rick had left him a soft, invisible hand to hold. The night carried a rhythm all its own. A low wind whispered through broken panes, soft and unhurried, and Morty could hear the trees outside creaking gently, their branches stretching like long, careful fingers. He remembered the times he had run frantically alongside Rick, chasing portals, dodging crises, never pausing to consider the quiet moments. But now the stillness felt alive, and he began to understand that the universe didn't only exist in explosive moments or dramatic twists. Sometimes it existed in quiet understanding, in the unspoken acknowledgement of someone's presence. Morty found a chair near the window and sat, legs pulled close, gazing out at the night. The Citadel's lights blinked softly in the distance, tiny constellations of human ambition, neither threatening nor comforting, just there. And Morty felt a strange kinship with them, these small pinpricks of existence. They were like him, like everyone, trying to find a place where their quiet moments could matter, where their own hum of being could settle into something soft, something remembered. He thought about the countless Mortys he had seen, scattered across infinite timelines, some brave, some fearful, some lost entirely, and he felt a delicate thread tying them all together, a recognition of struggle, of quiet courage, and of unseen tenderness. A memory surfaced, one of his childhood, when he had first discovered that small things could hold immense significance. He had been sitting under a tree, a simple moment of curiosity and wonder, listening to the wind rustle the leaves and feeling the sun warm his skin. That sensation had stayed with him, tucked deep within his chest, a soft ember he carried through worlds and realities. And now, he realized, the quiet power of noticing, of feeling, of lingering was perhaps the most profound strength he possessed. It was a skill not measured in battles or conquests, but in small acts of care, in subtle acknowledgement, in the tender recognition that someone, somewhere, was alive and feeling too. Morty leaned his head back, letting it rest against the cool glass. The city hummed softly, a low lullaby that seemed composed entirely for him. He allowed himself to close his eyes for a moment, and in the darkness behind his lids he could see the faint shimmer of memories, of adventures, mistakes, laughter, and tears. Each flicker was a tiny story, a fragment of him that existed somewhere in the infinite expanse of possibility. And he realized that even in absence, even in silence, these fragments held meaning. They were pieces of himself he could honor, gently, without pressure, without expectation. Somewhere, he thought, Rick must be out there, carrying his own quiet moments, perhaps unaware of the echo he had left behind. And Morty felt a swell of gentle gratitude, a recognition that the universe could be both strange and tender at once. He realized that growth wasn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it was as simple as observing, as gentle as holding a thought, as subtle as feeling another's absence and still finding warmth in the memory of their presence. He opened the notebook again, tracing the lines with care, reading fragments aloud in a whisper that seemed too small for the lab, but perfect for the night. Words twisted and curved, formulas and musings blending into something like poetry. Morty felt the quiet joy of understanding. Not the kind that demanded applause, but the kind that gently nods, a recognition between you and the world that says, I see you, I feel you, you are not alone. He understood, in a soft, unobtrusive way, that this was his inheritance from Rick. The subtle courage to notice, to care, to linger, to be present in the moments others might overlook. Time folded itself gently. Around him, hours stretching and compressing like the ebb of a tide. Morty felt the pulse of the night, a rhythm as old as the stars and as tender as the first drop of rain on a quiet street. He imagined all the Mortys scattered across the multiverse, some trembling, some fearless, some unsure of the steps they had taken, all connected by the quiet resilience of simply existing. And in that imagining, he found a gentle comfort, a warmth that settled in the chest like a soft blanket. He allowed himself to drift, thoughts mingling with the hum of the universe, each one soft, each one carrying the delicate weight of curiosity and care. In that suspended space, he understood something profound, that life, in its infinite complexity, could be tender, that moments of quiet reflection could carry the weight of universes, that even a Morty, small and uncertain, could find significance in the gentle acts of observation, empathy, and subtle bravery. And as he leaned back, eyes closing, he whispered to himself, a lullaby more to the heart than to the ear. It's okay to be small. It's okay to notice. It's okay to feel. And so the night continued, unbroken and soft, carrying Morty gently forward. The stars above blinked with quiet patience. The wind whispered through distant branches. And somewhere, perhaps, the universe itself held its breath in quiet acknowledgement. Morty slept lightly, cradled by the hum of existence, carried on the tender wings of reflection, and held in the soft embrace of a world that was at once immense and intimate. And he knew, in that moment, that every quiet act of noticing, every gentle memory, every subtle thought was a testament to the fragile, beautiful persistence of being alive. The dawn arrived in a Santaman with a heavy, tense air that seemed to press down on the kingdom. The vibrant colours of the festival were now replaced by muted earth tones as the people went about their daily routines, wary and subdued. Rumours had begun to circulate through the villages and town squares, rumours of strangers seen near the northern borders, of shadowy figures slipping between trees, and of unusual gatherings in places once considered safe. The peace that King Kwame Kofi and Amatse had so carefully nurtured felt fragile, as though it could shatter at the slightest provocation. King Kwame Kofi convened his council early in the morning. Zuberi Taji, Kofi Oba, and Adama Bako gathered. In the royal chamber, the tension in the room palpable. Maps were spread across the central table, showing the outer borders of the kingdom and the neighbouring lands. The king's hand hovered over the northern edge, tracing the line where the strangers were reported. "We must understand who they are and what they want," he said firmly, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of concern. "Our people cannot live in fear while shadows linger at our borders." Zuberi Taji, ever meticulous, suggested sending scouts to investigate. "We need eyes and ears in every village and along every pathway leading north," he advised. "If we catch wind of their intentions early, we can prevent disaster." Kofi Oba, who had grown more cautious after past betrayals, added, "We cannot underestimate these strangers. If they are as dangerous as the rumors suggest, we must prepare our defenses without alarming the populace unnecessarily." Adama Bako, who had long been trusted for his wisdom in both strategy and diplomacy, spoke last. "Patience and subtlety will be our allies," he said. "We should not provoke a confrontation before we fully understand the situation." By mid-morning, scouts were dispatched in groups, each traveling different routes to gather information. Amatse remained in the castle, coordinating communication between the scouts and the royal council, ensuring that news would reach the king immediately. Her presence brought a sense of calm to the council, her intelligence and decisiveness, a reassuring contrast to the uncertainty of the moment. Meanwhile, in the northern forests, the strangers moved with quiet efficiency. Their leader, a tall figure cloaked in dark fabric that blended seamlessly with the shadows, surveyed the land with sharp, calculating eyes. Around him, followers prepared for actions that seemed deliberate and disciplined. Though the villagers had only glimpsed them fleetingly, their presence was enough to unsettle the community. The leader's voice, low and commanding, directed his followers to remain hidden yet vigilant. "The time will come," he said, "to test the strength of this kingdom. We must be ready." As the day progressed, the scouts returned with fragmented reports. Some saw small groups of strangers moving through the forest. Others found signs of recent encampments, abandoned but still smouldering with the faint scent of fire. Though none of the encounters resulted in direct conflict, the collective information painted a picture of organized intent. Zuberi Taji studied the reports meticulously, noting patterns in the strangers' movements and estimating their numbers. "They are testing us," he concluded, "mapping our territory, understanding our habits. This is no random wandering." By afternoon, the council convened again. King Kwame Kofi's expression was stern, the weight of responsibility pressing heavily upon him. "We must prepare for every possibility," he said. "Defensive positions, alert villagers, train our warriors, but above all, we must remain vigilant and calm. Panic will serve no one." The council agreed on several measures, strengthening the northern guard posts, instructing villagers to report unusual activity, and establishing watchpoints along forest paths and rivers. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the kingdom, a young scout rushed into the royal chamber, his face pale and eyes wide with alarm. "Your Majesty," he cried, "we have found a hidden camp within the forest, just beyond the northern ridge. They are larger than we thought, and their weapons are unlike anything we have seen before." The room fell into a tense silence. King Kwame Kofi's mind raced, considering both the immediate threat and the broader implications. He turned to Zuberi Taji. "Prepare a small team," he commanded. "We need to observe without revealing our presence. Understand their strength, their numbers, and their intentions." Under the cover of twilight, a select group of warriors led by Zuberi Taji and Kofi Oba moved toward the forest. Amatse provided guidance from the castle, ensuring communication lines remained open and backup support was ready if needed. The forest itself seemed alive with tension. Each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs heightened their awareness. Shadows shifted in the corners of their vision, and the distant calls of nocturnal creatures echoed eerily through the trees. They reached the hidden camp and observed from a concealed vantage point. The strangers had erected crude tents and a central fire around which they gathered in tight formation. Their leader spoke sharply, issuing commands that the group struggled to hear from a distance, but the tone alone conveyed authority and urgency. The observers counted the number of people in the camp. noting the presence of several armed individuals and what appeared to be supply caches of food, water, and weapons. Zuberi Taji whispered to Kofi Oba, "They are organized, disciplined. This is no mere raiding party. They intend to establish a foothold here." As night deepened, the scouts returned silently, bringing with them detailed sketches and notes on the strangers' activities. King Kwame Kofi examined the information with gravity. "We cannot wait for them to act first," he said. "Our kingdom's safety depends on our foresight. We will strengthen our borders, train our people, and establish a network of watchpoints that ensures no approach goes unnoticed. At the same time, we will seek dialogue if the opportunity presents itself, for if they can be reasoned with, we avoid unnecessary bloodshed." The following days were a whirlwind of preparation. Villagers were instructed in basic defensive maneuvers, and watchpoints were established in strategic locations. Warriors drilled in formations designed to respond to sudden attacks, while scouts continued to monitor the northern borders. King Kwame Kofi and Amatse visited villages personally, reassuring people and ensuring that morale remained high. Despite the growing threat, the sense of unity among the kingdom's citizens strengthened, proving that even in the face of fear, community could be a source of resilience. Late one evening, a messenger arrived with a note carried by a stranger, cloaked in grey. The message was brief but chilling. "We see your preparations. Do not underestimate us. The time of reckoning is near." King Kwame Kofi read the words slowly, the weight of their implication settling heavily upon him. He placed the parchment on the table and looked to his council. "We are no longer dealing with rumors," he said. "This is a challenge that tests the strength of our kingdom, our unity, and our resolve." That night, as the palace slept, the king walked the quiet corridors, pondering the coming days. Amatse joined him, her presence a calming force. "We have faced challenges before," she said softly, "and we emerged stronger. This is no different. The key is to act with wisdom, not haste. Our people trust us, and we must honor that trust." King Kwame Kofi nodded, drawing strength from her words. "We will meet this threat as we have met all others," he replied, "with courage, strategy, and the unity of a Santaman behind us." The kingdom braced itself, aware that the coming days would test every ounce of their strength and unity. In shadows beyond the northern forests, the strangers continued their preparations, unaware that they were not merely facing a kingdom, but a people whose bonds had been forged through trials, forgiveness, and a shared commitment to one another. The stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the safety of a Santaman, but the very legacy of King Kwame Kofi and Amatse, a legacy built on resilience, wisdom, and the unyielding spirit of a united kingdom. The dawn broke over a Santaman with a golden hue, casting long shadows across the kingdom's newly rebuilt streets. A quiet tension lingered beneath the usual hum of activity, an unease that the villagers could not yet name. The Festival of Unity had left a lingering warmth, but in the hearts of the king and his closest advisers there was a sense that peace was still fragile. Though smiles adorned faces, whispers of old rivalries and hidden ambitions seemed to ripple like an undercurrent beneath the surface of daily life. King Kwame Kofi convened his council in the great hall, its walls adorned with tapestries depicting the kingdom's victories and struggles. The hall, usually a place of celebration and deliberation, now carried a weight of caution. Zuberi Taji, ever vigilant, had reported unusual movements in the northern forests, near the border villages, that had once been rife with dissent. Scouts spoke of shadows moving in the woods at odd hours, of small fires burning without purpose, and of travelers who disappeared along the less traveled paths. Kwame Kofi listened carefully, his brow furrowed as he weighed each account. "Cannot ignore these signs," he said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "Our unity is strong, but strength without vigilance is like a tree with shallow roots. If we do not act, the rot may grow unseen until it is too late." Amatse, standing beside him, nodded in agreement. She had grown into a leader in her own right, her insights as valuable as any of the seasoned advisors. "Perhaps we must send envoys to the border villages," she suggested, "to strengthen bonds and ensure that no one is tempted to act against the kingdom's peace." Zuberi Taji, who had often been stern and commanding, now spoke with a measured urgency. "Your Majesty, it is not just unrest we must fear. There is intelligence suggesting that a coalition of former exiles and discontented nobles may be plotting to reclaim influence. They are silent but organized. If they strike, it will not be an open war, but a series of calculated attacks designed to destabilize us from within." The room fell into a heavy silence, the weight of the warning settling over every face. Kwame Kofi rose from his seat, pacing the floor as he considered their options. He knew that confrontation was inevitable, but the question was how to approach it without causing panic among the people. "We must be strategic," he said finally. "We cannot show fear, for that is what our adversaries seek. Instead, we will strengthen our defenses quietly, gather intelligence and prepare for any eventuality. Amma, I want you to oversee the communication with the border villages. Make certain they feel included and valued. Zuberi, you will organize a covert watch in the northern forests. Every movement, every unusual occurrence must be reported immediately." The council adjourned, each member aware that their tasks were crucial. As they left the hall, the kingdom continued its daily rhythm, the marketplace bustling with vendors, children chasing one another through the streets, and elders offering advice and recounting tales of past struggles. Yet, in the shadows, unseen, eyes observed the kingdom's movements, recording patterns and noting vulnerabilities. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a small contingent of scouts returned with troubling news. "Sire," one of them reported, breathless and covered in dust, "we saw figures moving in the trees near Kwaku's hamlet. They carried torches but avoided the main paths. They seemed to be scouting, perhaps planning something." The king's expression hardened. "How many?" he asked, his voice controlled but firm. "7, Your Majesty," the scout replied. "They were careful but coordinated. We could not approach without risking detection." Kwame Kofi nodded, absorbing the information. "Zuberi, you will take a small team and track them. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. We need to understand their intentions before revealing ours." The scout bowed and left, aware of the gravity of the mission. Night fell over the kingdom, cloaking the streets in darkness. In the forest, Zuberi and his team moved silently, their senses heightened to every rustle and crack of the underbrush. They had learned to anticipate the forest's rhythm, blending with its shadows as if they were part of it. Hours passed with careful observation until finally they spotted the figures from the scouts' report. The group was larger than anticipated, not 7 but closer to a dozen, armed with crude weapons and bearing insignia that marked them as exiles from the northern clans. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing movements and tactics, unaware of the eyes watching them. Zuberi's heart pounded, but he remained calm. He sent a swift message to the king using the signal system they had perfected during previous campaigns. Each detail was recorded, their numbers, their demeanor, their apparent plan to infiltrate border villages and incite dissent. The forest, which had been a sanctuary of life and growth, now seemed tense and watchful, as if it too understood the danger that loomed. Back in the palace, Kwame Kofi received the report with a mixture of concern and resolve. The peace they had worked so hard to cultivate was being tested, but he refused to let fear dictate their actions. "We will confront this threat with intelligence and precision," he said, addressing his advisers in the candle-lit chamber. "The people must not sense our unease. They trust us to protect them, and we will not fail." Over the next days, the kingdom operated with quiet vigilance. Scouts patrolled the forests, envoys traveled to the villages, and artisans and farmers continued their work, unaware of the shadow that had crept near their homes. Kwame Kofi and Amatse met daily with Zuberi to analyze movements, develop contingency plans, and ensure that communication lines remained secure. Every decision was weighed with care, balancing caution with the need to maintain the morale and trust of their people. One night, as the moon rose high above the kingdom, a sudden alarm shattered the calm. Fires had been set on the outskirts of Kwaku's hamlet, and villagers were fleeing toward the main roads. Zuberi and his team responded immediately, racing to contain the threat. The attackers, a group of exiles emboldened by the cover of darkness, were relentless, but they had underestimated the kingdom's preparedness. Archers took positions along the tree lines, and strategic traps slowed the intruders' advance. Kwame Kofi arrived with a contingent of loyal guards, his presence bolstering the villagers' courage. Amatse coordinated the evacuation and ensured that the elderly and children were safe. The clash, though brief, was fierce, leaving the attackers retreating into the forest with losses they had not anticipated. The villagers, though frightened, witnessed the resilience and courage of their leaders and allies, a reminder that unity was their greatest strength. In the aftermath, as fires were extinguished and the wounded tended to, Kwame Kofi addressed the gathered villagers. "Tonight, we faced a threat to our peace," he said, his voice echoing in the silent square. "But we have shown that together we are unbreakable. Let this be a lesson. Our strength lies not only in our swords and shields, but in our unity, our trust, and our vigilance." The villagers responded with a cheer, their fear giving way to a renewed sense of belonging and commitment to the kingdom. Amatse, standing beside him, caught Zuberi's eye and nodded. They had successfully defended their people, but they knew the danger was not entirely gone. The exiles would regroup, perhaps in greater numbers, but a Santaman had learned an invaluable lesson. Peace required constant vigilance, and leadership demanded both courage and foresight. As the night deepened and the kingdom settled into a cautious calm, Kwame Kofi reflected on the events of the past days. The Festival of Unity had been a triumph, but it was merely the beginning of a new era, one in which the kingdom would be tested repeatedly and its leaders would need to remain ever watchful. The balance between celebration and preparation, between trust and caution, was delicate, but with wisdom, strength, and unity, a Santaman could endure any storm that approached its borders. In the forest beyond Kwaku's hamlet, the exiles gathered around a hidden fire, nursing their wound, and whispering in low tones. Their eyes glinted with determination, and though they had been repelled, their resolve had only strengthened. The kingdom had defended itself once, but they would return, seeking to exploit any weakness, any lapse in vigilance. Shadows moved among the trees, silent yet menacing, hinting at trials yet to come for a Santaman and its people. As dawn approached, a thin mist settled over the kingdom, softening the edges of the destruction but not the memory of the threat. Villagers emerged from their homes, tending to the remnants of the night's chaos, while King Kwame Kofi and Amatse walked among them, offering comfort, guidance, and reassurance. In their hearts, the knowledge remained clear. Unity was powerful, but it was also fragile, and the duty of protection was unending. The day began with quiet determination, the kingdom resilient despite the shadow of danger. Zuberi organized additional patrols, ensuring that no corner remained unmonitored, while scouts ventured further into the forest, mapping terrain and potential ambush points. The people, unaware of the full scope of the threat, continued their work with renewed vigor, inspired by the leadership and courage displayed during the night's trials. Kwame Kofi stood atop the palace balcony, gazing at the awakening kingdom. The sun's rays glimmered on the rooftops and the winding streets, a reminder that light could always pierce the darkest night. He knew that challenges would come, that the exiles would return, and that maintaining peace required constant effort. But he also knew that Asanteman had endured, and that its people, united in purpose and spirit, could withstand any storm. The balance of vigilance and hope, of caution and courage, would define the next chapter of their story, a story that was far from over. The early morning mist clung to the edges of Asanteman like a delicate veil, softening the outlines of the kingdom's familiar hills and riverbanks. Though the air was crisp with the promise of a new day, a subtle tension lingered beneath the surface. Rumors had begun to swirl about unusual movements in the northern borderlands, where scouts reported shadows flitting through the trees. At twilight, King Kwame Kofi rose from his chambers, feeling the weight of responsibility heavier than the night before, aware that even after years of peace, vigilance was necessary. He dressed carefully, donning the ceremonial robes of the Asante kings, and called for Zuberi Taji to join him in a strategic meeting before the day's council. In the council hall, sunlight poured through stained glass windows, illuminating the intricate carvings that adorned the walls. Amatse stood silently near the edge of the room, her hands folded, listening intently as Zuberi laid out the reports from the northern scouts. "We have observed small groups moving with precision," he said, his voice low but firm. "They appear to be testing the defenses, probing for weaknesses. So far, they have not attacked directly, but their coordination is unlike any ordinary raiders." Kwame Kofi nodded thoughtfully, his eyes narrowing. He had long relied on his instincts as a ruler, knowing that threats often began as whispers. Before they became shouts, Amatse, always perceptive, spoke softly. "Perhaps they are not merely testing strength. Perhaps they seek something specific, something hidden in the kingdom. The northern forests hold secrets, ancient places that even many of our elders do not visit." Her words caused a ripple of unease through the council. The elders exchanged glances, acknowledging the possibility that the kingdom's peace could be fragile, built on knowledge now partially lost. Kwame Kofi leaned forward. "We must act decisively, gather the best scouts and warriors immediately. I want the borders reinforced and patrols doubled. Zuberi, coordinate the defenses. Alma, ensure that our archives and sacred sites are secured. We cannot allow any vulnerability to go unnoticed." The council members nodded, each understanding the gravity of the moment. By midday, the kingdom was abuzz with activity. Messengers rode swiftly to northern villages, summoning able-bodied men and women to assist in fortifying watchtowers and clearing hidden paths. The sounds of hammering, chopping, and shouted instructions filled the air, blending with the hum of daily life. Yet, a shared determination unified the people. They had celebrated unity months earlier, and now they would defend it with the same fervor. Children peeked from windows and alleyways, wide-eyed, sensing that something significant was unfolding, though unable to grasp its full meaning. In the northern borderlands, scouts moved silently through dense undergrowth. Each step was deliberate, every rustle of leaves or crack of a twig scrutinized for signs of the approaching threat. Zuberi Taji led one of the squads, his experience evident in the way he signaled without words, guiding the scouts to strategic vantage points. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, making the environment both beautiful and ominous. As evening fell, a messenger returned with alarming news. A large contingent, cloaked in dark fabric and armed with unfamiliar weapons, had been sighted near the edge of the northern ridge. They had remained hidden during daylight, only revealing themselves at twilight, moving with purpose and discipline. Kwame Kofi gathered his advisors and warriors in the main hall, reviewing the intelligence. Maps were spread across the polished wooden table, marked with the latest observations and predictions. The king's hand rested on the center of the map, tracing possible approaches the intruders might take. "They are not here to plunder," he said quietly. "They are searching. But for what? And why?" Amatse, ever observant, examined the northern region on the map. "These invaders may be drawn by the same legends that have been whispered in our villages for generations. Tales of hidden treasures, of ancient knowledge, or even of artifacts from our ancestors. If they possess the cunning and ruthlessness to organize so efficiently, they will stop at nothing to obtain what they seek." Her words added urgency to the room. The council recognized that the kingdom's strength lay not only in its warriors, but in its wisdom, history, and unity. That night, Kwame Kofi led a covert expedition into the northern forests, accompanied by Zuberi, Amatse, and a select group of skilled warriors. The moon cast pale light on their path, highlighting glistening dew on leaves and the occasional startled glance of nocturnal animals. Every snap of a branch, every whisper of wind demanded attention, and Kwame felt the familiar rush of heightened awareness. The forest seemed alive with anticipation, as if it too were awaiting the confrontation to come. They discovered evidence of the intruders' presence, discarded supplies, footprints, and faint markings on trees indicating their movements. Zuberi studied each sign carefully. "They are moving in a pattern designed to confuse trackers," he said. "They know these lands well or have studied them extensively. This is no ordinary raid, it is a calculated operation." Kwame Kofi's expression hardened. He had faced enemies before, but the methodical nature of this group suggested a level of strategy that required careful counteraction. The next day, scouts reported that the intruders had established a temporary camp near a hidden grove, a location believed to house an ancient temple that contained relics of great significance. Kwame Kofi convened his advisors and warriors once more, formulating a plan to approach the situation with both caution and strength. The strategy was twofold: protect the sacred site and confront the intruders with overwhelming precision, if necessary. Amatse offered insights on protective charms and old rites that could mask the area from discovery, blending tradition with tactical necessity. In the hours that followed, the kingdom mobilized. Archers took positions along tree lines, scouts prepared signals, and warriors armed themselves with weapons both familiar and newly forged for the occasion. The tension was palpable. The people of Asantaman had not encountered such a coordinated threat before, and the stakes were immeasurably high. Kwame Kofi walked among his defenders, offering encouragement and strategic advice, his calm determination inspiring confidence even in the most anxious heart. At dawn, the intruders made their move. The forest erupted into action as scouts signaled the approach of the cloaked figures. Kwame Kofi and his warriors, hidden strategically among the trees, waited for the perfect moment. The intruders, unaware of the ambush, advanced toward the sacred grove, their movements precise and silent. The first clash was sudden and intense, a whirlwind of motion, sound, and energy. Warriors on both sides engaged in fierce combat, each demonstrating skill, courage, and determination. Amatses used her knowledge of the terrain to guide her group through hidden paths, striking at strategic points and distracting the intruders. Zuberi coordinated reinforcements with efficiency, ensuring that each ambush point was utilized to maximum effect. Despite the intruders' advanced tactics, Asantiman's defenders relied on their deep knowledge of the land and unity, turning the forest into a labyrinth of strategic advantage. Hours passed, with moments of victory and setback as the battle unfolded. Kwame Kofi, ever vigilant, fought at the forefront, his presence a rallying force for his warriors. Sweat, dust, and determination mingled as the confrontation reached its climax. Gradually, the intruders' coordination began to falter under the combined strength, cunning, and resilience of Asantiman's defenders. One by one, the invading figures retreated into the shadows, realizing that they had underestimated the kingdom's resolve. As the dust settled and silence returned to the forest, Kwame Kofi, Amatse, and Zuberi gathered their warriors. Though fatigued and bloodied, they had successfully defended the sacred grove and repelled the intruders. The kingdom had survived yet another threat, strengthened not only by the courage of its people, but by the wisdom and unity that had become its foundation. The northern forests once again returned to their tranquil state, yet the memory of the confrontation remained as a testament to the resilience and foresight of Asantiman. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of amber and violet, Kwame Kofi addressed his people from the palace balcony. "We have faced shadows today," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "But we have stood firm. Our strength lies not in fear or in isolation, but in our unity, our courage, and our respect to one another. Let this victory remind us that even in the darkest times, we can protect what is sacred, and we can emerge stronger than before." The people cheered, their voices echoing into the twilight. Fires were lit across the kingdom, signaling celebration, vigilance, and renewal. The battle had tested them, but it had also reaffirmed the enduring spirit of Asantiman. Families reunited, warriors tended to wounds, and scouts continued their watchful patrols, ensuring that the kingdom remained safe. Kwame Kofi, standing beside Amatse and Zuberi, felt a renewed sense of responsibility and pride. Though challenges would undoubtedly arise in the future, the bonds forged through struggle and shared purpose had strengthened the kingdom beyond measure. In the quiet moments that followed, the king reflected on the events of the day. The intruders' presence had revealed vulnerabilities, but it had also inspired innovation, courage, and unity. Asantiman had proven that its greatest strength was not merely in its walls or weapons, but in its people, their loyalty, wisdom, and willingness to defend the values that defined them. With this knowledge, Kwame Kofi knew that the kingdom could face whatever challenges lay ahead, not with fear, but with confidence, strategy, and the enduring power of unity. The morning sun cast its first golden rays over the kingdom of Asantiman, painting the hills in warm hues of amber and green. Birds sang in melodious harmony, their notes drifting across the river that wound through the valleys. But despite the serene beauty, a restless tension simmered beneath the surface. King Kwame Kofi had sensed it in the hushed whispers among the elders and the fleeting glances exchanged by villagers at dawn. There was a shadow looming over the land, subtle yet persistent, one that threatened to disturb the peace they had fought so hard to restore. Amatse, noticing the king's distant expression, approached him with gentle concern. "Your Majesty, the morning feels unusually quiet," she said softly, touching his arm. "Is there something troubling you?" King Kwame Kofi sighed, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "There are signs, Amatse. Small ones perhaps, but they speak of unrest. Our enemies do not sleep, and neither should our vigilance." He paused, then added, "I fear that while our hearts are mended, our kingdom may still be vulnerable to those who hunger for power." In the days that followed, scouts reported strange movements in the outskirts of Asantaman. Small groups of unknown riders had been spotted near the northern forests, their banners unfamiliar and their faces hidden beneath dark cloths. Villagers returning from trade markets mentioned seeing emissaries from distant lands acting in secrecy, slipping through paths that were usually safe and well-travelled. Zuberi Taji, ever vigilant, gathered information meticulously, noting patterns in their routes and behaviours. He shared his findings with the king, emphasizing the need for strategic action before a threat could escalate. King Kwame Kofi called a council meeting in the Great Hall. The room, adorned with tapestries depicting the kingdom's history, seemed unusually heavy with tension. Amatse, Zuberi Taji, and other key advisors assembled, their faces reflecting concern and resolve. The king spoke with measured authority, detailing the intelligence reports and the potential implications for the kingdom's safety. "We must prepare ourselves," he said. "Not with fear, but with wisdom. We cannot allow our past mistakes to define our future. Plans were devised to strengthen the kingdom's borders, particularly along the northern edge where the scouts had reported unusual activity. Patrols increased and watchtowers were rebuilt and reinforced. Villagers were trained to recognize signs of infiltration, and a system of signal fires was established to communicate rapidly in case of emergencies. Meanwhile, the king sought alliances with neighboring territories, reaching out to those who had once been indifferent or distant. It was a delicate balance, asserting strength without provoking hostility, extending trust without exposing weakness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains and shadows lengthened across the palace courtyard, a messenger arrived on horseback. His cloak was tattered, his horse exhausted, and his eyes wide with urgency. He knelt before King Kwame Kofi and delivered news that sent a ripple of alarm through the hall. "Your Majesty," he gasped, "a band of raiders has been spotted. Approaching the southern villages, they move swiftly, striking without warning. They number more than 100, and they carry weapons unlike any I have seen." The room erupted into whispers, a mix of fear and disbelief. Amatse placed a hand on the king's shoulder, grounding him in the moment. Zuberi Taji, ever the strategist, immediately began mapping out possible defenses and counterattacks. King Kwame Kofi listened, weighing every word, every possibility. He knew that rash decisions could lead to devastation, but inaction was equally dangerous. After a pause, he spoke with calm determination. "We will defend our people, prepare the warriors, alert the villages, and ensure that every path of retreat and reinforcement is secure. Tonight, we act not out of anger, but out of duty." As dusk turned to night, the kingdom bristled with activity. Archers took positions atop the walls, their arrows sharpened and ready. Cavalry units patrolled the perimeter, their hooves echoing like distant drums. Scouts relayed constant updates, and villagers aided in fortifying gates and barricades. Amatse moved among them, offering reassurance and guidance, her presence a steadying force amid growing tension. The scent of smoke from torches mingled with the crisp night air, carrying a sense of urgency and resolve. By the time the first stars appeared, the raiders were within sight. Their silhouettes were shadowy and ominous, moving like a tide toward the southern villages. But King Kwame Kofi's preparation was meticulous. Signal fires were lit, summoning reinforcements from all corners of the kingdom. The villagers, trained and ready, took defensive positions, forming lines and barricades. Warriors, clad in gleaming armor, held their ground with disciplined precision. Zuberi Taji directed movements with keen awareness, ensuring that every unit was in its optimal position. When the raiders struck, they were met with a force they had not anticipated. Arrows rained from the walls, halting their advance. Cavalry flanked them from the sides, cutting off retreat paths. Despite their ferocity and numbers, the attackers found themselves outmaneuvered and contained. The clash echoed through the valley, shouts, the clash of metal, and the thrum of horses' hooves. Yet the kingdom held firm, united in defense and strategy. Amid the chaos, King Kwame Kofi led a contingent to secure the village center. His presence inspired both warriors and villagers alike, instilling courage in those who had feared the raiders' wrath. Amatse remained at the palace courtyard, coordinating supplies and tending to the wounded, her calm composure a beacon of hope. Zuberi Taji, moving like a shadow, anticipated the raiders' tactics, countering every maneuver with precision. The battle, though fierce, revealed the strength of a kingdom that had learned unity and resilience through hardship. By dawn, the raiders had been repelled. Many were captured, their intentions revealed through interrogation and observation. They had been hired by a distant warlord, one who sought to exploit a Santaman's newfound peace and prosperity. Their defeat, while significant, underscored the reality that threats were not always immediate or obvious. The kingdom had to remain vigilant, aware that the balance between peace and conflict was delicate and ever-shifting. In the aftermath, King Kwame Kofi addressed his people in the central square. His voice, firm yet compassionate, carried across the gathered crowd. Today we have faced a trial that tested our courage and unity. We have proven that through preparation, wisdom, and trust in one another, we can withstand threats both near and far. Let this victory remind us that vigilance is not born of fear, but of love for our home and our people. The villagers erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the valleys. Amatse, standing beside the king, felt a deep sense of pride and relief. Zuberi Taji, for all his stoicism, allowed himself a rare smile. The kingdom had faced danger and emerged stronger, their bonds of loyalty and cooperation reinforced through action. Yet even in triumph, King Kwame Kofi's thoughts remained thoughtful. The raiders were only a fragment of a larger plan, a reminder that peace was never guaranteed. He knew that as long as the kingdom prospered, there would always be those who sought to challenge it. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection, appreciating the courage, resilience, and unity that had saved a Santaman from devastation. The morning sun rose higher, bathing the land in light, and for the first time in weeks the kingdom felt truly alive. Villagers returned to their routines, children played in the streets, and the marketplace buzzed with renewed energy. The memory of the night's battle lingered, but so did a deeper understanding. A Santaman's strength lay not in its walls or armies alone, but in the unwavering spirit of its people, their loyalty and their courage. King Kwame Kofi looked out over the kingdom from the palace balcony, Amatse at his side. "We have faced danger, Amatse, and we have prevailed," he said. "But our journey is far from over. Peace is precious, and it must be nurtured every day with wisdom, vigilance, and compassion." Amatse nodded, her gaze steady. "And we will face it together, Your Majesty. A Santaman is more than a kingdom. It is a promise that we honor through unity, courage, and love." The king smiled, the weight of responsibility balanced by the strength of those around him. Together they would guide a Santaman through the challenges yet to come, ensuring that the legacy of their reign would be one of resilience, wisdom, and unwavering hope. The winds of change blew steadily across a Santaman, carrying with them both hope and uncertainty. The kingdom had enjoyed months of relative peace following the Festival of Unity, yet subtle tensions lingered beneath the surface. Whispers of dissent and old grudges, though long buried, began to resurface. King Kwame Kofi remained vigilant, aware that true peace was maintained not merely through celebration, but through constant attention and careful judgment. His advisors, including Zuberi Taji and Amatse, continued to counsel him, each offering insights shaped by experience and intuition. Yet, even with their guidance, challenges seemed to grow in complexity and unpredictability. One morning, a messenger arrived with urgent news from the Northern Territories. Reports indicated that a neighboring chiefdom, long considered neutral, had mobilized troops near the border. Rumors suggested that their leaders were dissatisfied with trade agreements and sought greater influence over a Santaman's wealth. The messenger, breathless from his journey, described the movement of soldiers, their banners dark against the rising sun. King Kwame Kofi listened carefully, weighing the implications. He knew that any aggressive response could ignite a conflict that the kingdom was not yet prepared to endure. Diplomacy, he decided, must be the first course of action. Amatse proposed a council meeting with all regional leaders to address the situation. The assembly convened in the Grand Hall, its walls echoing with centuries of tradition and governance. Chiefs and elders gathered, their faces reflecting concern, curiosity, and, in some cases, thinly veiled ambition. The discussions began cautiously, with leaders voicing grievances, suggestions, and demands. Some advocated for immediate military action, citing the strength of a Santaman's army and the potential to assert dominance. Others urged negotiation, emphasizing the long-term benefits of alliances over confrontation. King Kwame Kofi listened, attentively interjecting only when necessary to guide the conversation toward constructive solutions. After hours of deliberation, it became clear that a delicate balance was required. Kwame proposed a twofold strategy: a diplomatic envoy to the northern chiefdom to address their concerns, and a discreet reinforcement of border defenses to safeguard the kingdom. Zuberi Taji, skilled in both strategy and diplomacy, volunteered to lead the envoy, accompanied by trusted advisors who could present a Santaman's intentions clearly and respectfully. Meanwhile, the kingdom's soldiers trained rigorously not for immediate battle, but to demonstrate readiness and deter potential aggression. The people watched these developments with a mixture of anxiety and faith, hoping their leader's judgment would maintain stability. As Zuberi's delegation traveled north, the journey itself revealed deeper complexities. Villagers along the route expressed mixed reactions, some welcoming the envoys with cautious hospitality, while others shared fears of impending conflict. Zuberi recorded every detail, noting how miscommunication and unaddressed grievances could escalate tensions. Nights were spent in council under the stars, where strategies were refined and contingency plans drafted. The delegation's presence, though peaceful, reminded the northern territories that a Santaman was attentive, capable, and united under a firm yet fair leadership. Meanwhile, back in the capital, King Kwame Kofi faced internal challenges that threatened the cohesion of his court. Certain nobles, emboldened by months of peace, began vying for influence, attempting to sway decisions in their favor. They whispered accusations, subtly undermining colleagues and questioning the king's judgment. Amatse recognized the danger of such rivalries and counseled her husband to act decisively yet justly. Kwame Kofi convened private discussions with those nobles, listening to their concerns while gently reaffirming the values that bound the kingdom together: loyalty, fairness, and mutual respect. By addressing tensions early, he prevented minor disputes from becoming divisive conflicts. Weeks passed, and Zuberi Taji's delegation reached the northern capital. The atmosphere was tense but cautious. The northern chiefdom's leaders were wary of a Santaman's intentions, yet open to dialogue. Zuberi presented detailed accounts of a Santaman's policies, trade practices, and efforts to maintain regional harmony. He acknowledged their grievances and proposed adjustments to agreements that would benefit both territories. Hours of negotiation followed, marked by pauses, intense scrutiny, and careful consideration of every word. Ultimately, a preliminary accord was reached. Minor concessions would be made, trade routes secured, and mutual respect formally recognized. The northern leaders, though not entirely satisfied, agreed to maintain peace while monitoring the implementation of agreements. Zuberi Taji's return to a Santaman was met with relief and celebration. The envoy had succeeded in averting war, yet the lessons learned were profound. Diplomacy, while crucial, required constant vigilance, empathy, and the ability to anticipate hidden consequences. King Kwame Kofi commended Zuberi and the advisors, recognizing that the kingdom's strength lay not only in its armies, but in the wisdom and character of its leaders. Despite this success, challenges persisted in subtler forms. A series of mysterious incidents began occurring in the outskirts of a Santaman. Livestock disappeared without trace, messages were intercepted, and minor fires erupted in barns and granaries. The incidents were sporadic but alarming, suggesting deliberate sabotage rather than chance accidents. Amatse urged a careful investigation, and Zuberi proposed forming a small council of detectives and scouts to uncover the source of these disturbances. The council's mandate was clear: identify the perpetrators, understand their motives, and prevent escalation while maintaining the kingdom's peace. Investigation revealed that the incidents were orchestrated by a clandestine faction of discontented individuals, some former allies of previous rulers who had resisted King Kwame Kofi's reforms. They operated in secrecy, aiming to undermine trust and destabilize the kingdom's unity. The council worked methodically, gathering evidence, observing patterns, and tracing the networks that facilitated these acts. It became evident that the faction sought to exploit fear and suspicion, hoping that minor disruptions would spiral into larger conflicts. Confronting the faction required tact, intelligence, and courage. King Kwame Kofi organized a series of controlled operations. Scouts infiltrated suspected locations, messages were countered with misinformation to reveal key actors, and trusted envoys engaged community leaders to strengthen loyalty and confidence in the crown. Gradually, the faction's influence waned as their actions were anticipated and countered. Several members were apprehended and brought before the king, for immediate punishment, but for reconciliation and understanding. Some expressed remorse, acknowledging the kingdom's fairness and their own misjudgments. Others were exiled. To prevent further unrest, a measure that balanced justice with prudence. By the end of these trials, a Santaman emerged stronger. The kingdom's people had witnessed the effectiveness of vigilance, wisdom, and measured action. King Kwame Kofi's leadership was reinforced, not through fear or dominance, but through trust, empathy, and the demonstration that unity could withstand challenges both external and internal. Amatse, Zuberi Taji, and other advisors were recognized, not merely for their counsel, but for their active roles in safeguarding the kingdom's peace. In private moments, King Kwame Kofi reflected on the journey thus far. The challenges faced were not merely political or military, they were tests of character, vision, and resilience. Asanteman's strength derived from its people's ability to reconcile past grievances, to communicate openly, and to embrace both tradition and innovation. Every resolved conflict, every negotiated agreement, and every act of justice reinforced a larger principle that a kingdom's future depended as much on the hearts and minds of its people as on the strategies of its rulers. As the sun set over Asanteman, painting the skies in hues of gold and crimson, a sense of cautious optimism settled over the land. The northern threat had been averted, internal challenges addressed, and a clandestine faction neutralized. Yet the king knew that vigilance was perpetual, peace required constant care, understanding, and adaptability. He walked through the city, streets, observing children playing, merchants closing their stalls, and families sharing evening meals. The laughter, chatter, and warmth reminded him of the stakes and the rewards of his efforts. Asanteman was not merely surviving, it was thriving, learning from each challenge, and growing stronger in spirit and unity. And as night fell, with stars illuminating the kingdom in quiet brilliance, King Kwame Kofi resolved that every day forward would be dedicated to nurturing this hard-won peace, ensuring that Asanteman's legacy would endure for generations to come. The lessons of diplomacy, vigilance, and compassion would guide every decision, and the unity forged in the hearts of its people would remain the kingdom's most enduring strength. The dawn broke with a soft, golden light that filtered through the tall trees surrounding Asanteman. The kingdom, still recovering from recent unrest, had settled into a fragile rhythm. Villagers moved about their morning routines, their voices carrying the gentle cadence of daily life. Markets opened slowly, the aroma of fresh bread, roasted, yams, and herbal brews mingling in the cool air. Children ran barefoot along the cobbled streets, their laughter blending with the calls of merchants and the distant songs of birds. King Kwame Kofi awoke before the first rays fully touched the palace walls. He dressed quickly, the weight of responsibility pressing lightly, yet persistently on his shoulders. He walked to the balcony overlooking the courtyard, where guards practiced drills and apprentices polished armor. The kingdom appeared serene, yet Kwame Kofi's instincts, honed over years of challenges, whispered caution. Peace, as he had learned, could be deceptive. Even in the quietest of moments, shadows lingered. Amatse entered the room silently, her presence calming. "You've been awake long?" she observed, placing a hand lightly on his arm. Her eyes, filled with both concern and quiet strength, reflected her unwavering support. Kwame Kofi nodded, allowing a small smile. "I am restless," he admitted. "The festival brought joy, but I fear it also revealed the cracks we have yet to mend." She followed him to the balcony, scanning the horizon with him. "The people have hope," she said softly, "and hope is stronger than fear. But I understand your caution. Perhaps a day of reflection and planning is in order." Kwame Kofi agreed, knowing that preparation and foresight were the foundation of lasting security. By mid-morning, the council convened in the Grand Hall. Zuberi Taji, still recovering from minor injuries sustained during earlier skirmishes, took his place beside Kwame Kofi and Amatse. Advisors, village elders, and military leaders gathered, each carrying the weight of their respective responsibilities. Maps were spread across the large oak table, markers indicating trade routes, border villages, and areas requiring patrols. Discussions were serious yet measured, reflecting the kingdom's cautious optimism. Reports had arrived overnight from border scouts, unusual gatherings in the northern forests, far larger than the typical wandering tribes or merchants. Traders spoke of travelers with unfamiliar markings, and hunters mentioned tracks that did not resemble any known local creatures or people. These reports stirred unease. Zuberi Taji leaned forward, pointing to the map. If these movements continue unchecked, they could threaten our supply lines and the safety of our villages, he said, voice steady. I suggest we dispatch reconnaissance immediately and fortify our northern watchtowers. Amatse added a perspective rooted in diplomacy. Before taking direct action, we should attempt communication, she suggested. If these are wandering tribes seeking shelter or trade, a hostile approach could spark unnecessary conflict. We must understand their intentions first. Kwame Kofi weighed both opinions carefully, knowing that leadership required balancing caution with diplomacy. We shall split our approach, he decided. Reconnaissance teams will observe and report, while a small delegation will attempt peaceful contact. As plans were drawn, a young messenger entered, bowing deeply. His expression carried urgency. Your Majesty, a disturbance has been reported near the southern village of Nyamekye. Villagers claim they saw shadowy figures at dusk moving quickly through the trees and leaving strange markings on the ground. Kwame Kofi's brow furrowed. The north, and now the south, signals of unrest were appearing at both extremes of the kingdom. He gestured for the messenger to continue. The villagers are fearful, sire, the boy added, voice trembling. Some speak of voices whispering in the night, warning of events to come. They request your presence and guidance. Kwame Kofi exchanged glances with Amatse. The timing was troubling. We must go, he said decisively. Gather the royal guards and prepare for immediate travel. Amatse, will you accompany me? She nodded, her calm presence a steadying influence. We face these challenges together, she said. Always. Within the hour, the king, queen, and a contingent of guards rode toward Nyamekye. The journey through the rolling hills and dense woodlands was uneventful at first, the morning sun casting long shadows that danced across the path. Birds chirped above, yet an underlying tension clung to the air. Kwame Kofi's senses remained alert, noting every unusual sound, every break in the natural rhythm of the forest. When they arrived at Nyamekye, villagers had gathered at the edge of the settlement, their faces pale with worry. Children clung to mothers, elders leaned on walking sticks, and the local militia stood ready, though visibly uneasy. Kwame Kofi dismounted, offering a reassuring presence. Peace be upon you all, he said. Tell me what has occurred. The village elder, a wiry man with sharp eyes and a calm demeanor despite evident fear, stepped forward. Your Majesty, it began at dusk, he explained. Shadowed figures moved silently among the trees. They did not speak, yet their presence was heavy and foreboding. By morning, strange markings appeared on the ground, symbols we have never seen before. Our animals were restless, and a sense of unease settled over the village. He paused, glancing at the king and queen. We do not know their intent. Some fear they bring misfortune. Others think they are spies or worse. Kwame Kofi studied the symbols carefully. Though unfamiliar, they were deliberate, precise, and carried a certain symmetry. Zuberi Taji stepped forward, his military mind analyzing each line and curve. These markings may serve as warnings, or they could be a method of communication, he suggested. We must be cautious, for whoever left them is intelligent and aware of our presence. Amatse approached, placing a reassuring hand on the elder's shoulder. We will ensure your village remains safe, she promised. Together, we will discover what these signs mean and how to respond. Trust in our efforts, and do not allow fear to dominate your hearts. Her calm authority seemed to ease some of the tension among the villagers, yet the unease lingered. As night fell, the royal party set up camp on the outskirts of the village, with guards forming a perimeter. Fires flickered in the cool evening air, and the sounds of nocturnal creatures added a layer of mystery to the surroundings. Kwame Kofi remained alert, his mind analyzing every shadow, every rustle of leaves. Despite the apparent calm, he sensed that the disturbance in Nyamekye was merely a prelude to something greater, a test of the kingdom's resilience and unity. In the depth of the night, a faint whisper carried on the wind, indistinct yet haunting. The guards stirred, and Kwame Kofi's hand rested on the hilt of his sword. Amatse, sensing his unease, touched his arm lightly. "We are ready," she said. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The whisper persisted, fading and returning, in irregular patterns, as if the forest itself spoke in riddles. Shadows shifted beyond the firelight, elongated and unfamiliar, testing the vigilance of the assembled party. By dawn, the symbols were examined again, and scouts reported additional signs deeper in the surrounding forest. Kwame Kofi gathered his advisors. "We cannot ignore this," he said. "These markings are no ordinary acts. Someone is attempting to communicate, or perhaps to challenge us. Our response must be careful, yet decisive." Zuberi Taji nodded. "We will dispatch trained scouts to follow the symbols while keeping our villages informed. Any hostile action will be met with precision and strength." Amatse suggested a plan of subtle observation combined with diplomacy. If we can understand the motives behind these actions, we might prevent unnecessary conflict. Knowledge is the truest weapon, and patience is our shield. Kwame Kofi agreed, recognizing the wisdom in her counsel. The kingdom's strength lay not only in arms but in insight, strategy, and the enduring bonds between its people. The day passed with careful vigilance. Scouts moved quietly through the trees, observing the terrain and searching for signs of the shadowed figures. Villagers were reassured by the king's presence, and life in Nyamekye continued, though under the watchful eyes of both locals and the royal party. Evening brought reports of distant fires and faint figures moving among the trees. Kwame Kofi's resolve hardened. The kingdom would face this emerging threat with courage, unity, and foresight. As the moon rose, casting silver light over the forest, Kwame Kofi and Amatse stood together, surveying the horizon. "This is only the beginning," he said quietly. "But we are prepared, and we will protect our people." Amatse nodded, her eyes reflecting the moonlight and the unspoken promise of solidarity. "Together, we will face whatever comes," she affirmed. The shadows of the forest seemed to shift in acknowledgement, as if the land itself understood the determination of those who ruled wisely and with courage. The night deepened, carrying with it a sense of foreboding and anticipation. A Santaman was on the brink of a new challenge, one that would test not only the bravery of its king and queen, but the very unity of its people. The signs were clear. Peace was precious but fragile, and vigilance would be the kingdom's greatest ally. In the quiet moments before dawn, Kwame Kofi resolved that a Santaman would endure, and its light would not be extinguished, even in the face of the unknown shadows gathering beyond the trees. The dawn broke over a Santaman with a fragile serenity that belied the tension simmering beneath its surface. Though the kingdom had endured many storms and emerged stronger, recent events had awakened an unease that could not be ignored. King Kwame Kofi stood on the balcony of his palace, gazing at the morning mist curling over the distant hills. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and blooming flowers, a stark contrast to the heavy weight on his shoulders. He knew that the harmony achieved after the Festival of Unity was still delicate, a tapestry easily frayed by old grievances and hidden ambitions. Amatseh entered the balcony quietly, her presence a comforting anchor to the king's restless mind. "You've been watching the hills since dawn," she said softly, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "Is something troubling you, my king?" Kwame Kofi sighed, rubbing his temples. "I fear that our peace, however genuine it may seem, is being tested. Reports have reached me of unusual gatherings in the border villages. Traders and travelers speak of strangers moving under the cover of darkness. There is no open rebellion, yet but shadows are gathering where light should shine." Amatseh's eyes darkened with apprehension. "Shadows often take root quietly. They watch, they wait, and then they strike when vigilance wanes. Do you believe these strangers are agents of the old factions?" "I cannot be certain," the king admitted. "But I do know that for every step forward we take, there are those who wish to pull us back into chaos. We cannot ignore this, for even a single spark can ignite a fire that destroys all we have built." The council gathered later that morning in the great hall, its marble floors gleaming under the light of high windows. Advisors, generals, and envoys filled the room, their expressions ranging from concern to skepticism. Zuberi Taji, ever vigilant and perceptive, took the floor. "Your Majesty," he began, "we have intercepted messages and noted unusual trade activity along the northern borders. These strangers are organized, moving with precision. If our intelligence is correct, they are preparing for a coordinated effort, though the purpose remains unclear. It would be wise to increase our patrols and alert our allies." Kwame Kofi nodded thoughtfully, his fingers steepled before him. "Very well. Strengthen the northern garrison and discreetly gather information on these intruders. Amatseh, I need you to coordinate with the villages, ensuring that the people remain calm but vigilant. Fear can be as destructive as any enemy." Amatseh inclined her head. "It will be done, my king. I will personally visit the villages closest to the borders and establish lines of communication with their leaders. No movement will go unnoticed." Days passed with an uneasy rhythm. Scouts returned with fragmented reports. Groups of cloaked figures seen at night, unfamiliar markings near ancient ruins, whispers of a new faction rallying behind a mysterious leader. The people of the Santaman began to feel the subtle tension, their conversations tinged with suspicion, their smiles more guarded. Even the markets, once lively and bustling, carried an undertone of caution as traders and villagers exchanged wary glances. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of crimson and gold, King Kwame Kofi convened a private council with his most trusted allies. Zuberi Taji, Amatseh, and Kofi Oba were present, the air thick with anticipation. "We must consider the possibility that this faction intends to challenge the very foundation of our unity. Kwame Kofi said, his voice firm. I will not allow a Santaman to fall prey to fear or deception. We must act strategically, not impulsively. Kofi Oba, his expression grim, spoke next. Your Majesty, intelligence suggests they may have infiltrators within our own borders. It is possible that they are not just external threats, but have allies hidden among those we trust. We must identify and neutralize these agents before they can cause irreparable harm. Amatse's eyes narrowed. Then we need not only to watch the borders, but to examine our own ranks subtly and carefully. We cannot accuse without proof, but we cannot ignore the possibility either. Zuberi Taji leaned forward, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the table. I recommend a twofold approach. First, strengthen our defenses and increase surveillance. Second, deploy discreet intelligence agents among our people, those whose loyalty is unquestionable. If we act with caution and precision, we can uncover the extent of this threat without alerting the enemy to our awareness. Kwame Kofi nodded, a sense of resolve settling over him. Then let it be so. Amatse, you will oversee the internal investigation. Zuberi, manage the intelligence network along the borders. Kofi Oba, prepare our forces for immediate deployment if necessary. The moment we hesitate, we give this faction an advantage. The nights that followed were restless. Scouts reported sightings of small groups moving through forests and abandoned pathways, their intentions cloaked in secrecy. Whispered rumors reached the villages, stories of strange fires, cryptic symbols etched on trees, and fleeting figures that vanished before they could be confronted. The people's unease grew, and though they trusted their king, the tension in the air was palpable. One fateful night, as a silver moon hung low over the kingdom, a messenger arrived at the palace, breathless and frantic. "Your Majesty," he cried, "the northern villages have been attacked, fires burn, and the villagers speak of masked assailants. They came swiftly and vanished just as quickly, leaving destruction in their wake. We have lost communication with the border guards in that sector." Kwame Kofi's eyes darkened with resolve. "Gather the council at once," he commanded. "Amatse, ride to the affected villages immediately. Kofi Oba, ready the northern garrison for mobilization. Zuberi, gather intelligence and ensure that no other attacks go unnoticed. Tonight, we act decisively." Amatse mounted her horse and rode through the night, the wind whipping her hair as the scent of smoke grew stronger. The villages she reached were in chaos. Homes smoldered, livestock scattered, and terrified families huddled together. Yet, despite the devastation, she saw resilience in the villagers' eyes. They had faced hardships before and survived. She organized efforts to extinguish fires and protect the vulnerable, her presence a beacon of hope amid the darkness. Meanwhile, Kofi Oba led the garrison north, moving with urgency and precision. They discovered remnants of the attackers, discarded weapons, torn cloaks, and cryptic markings, but no sign of the enemy. The precision of the assault suggested meticulous planning and intimate knowledge of the kingdom's defenses. Kofi Oba's concern deepened. Whoever these intruders were, they were not ordinary raiders. Back at the palace, Kwame Kofi convened the council once more. "These attacks are calculated, not chaotic," he said grimly. "We face a faction capable of strategic strikes, ones designed to sow fear and confusion. We must uncover their leader and motives before they escalate further. Zuberi, intensify your intelligence gathering. Amatse, ensure the villagers are safe and their confidence restored. Kofi Oba, maintain readiness for immediate action." As the council dispersed, Kwame Kofi remained in the strategy room, his thoughts heavy. He understood that the kingdom's greatest strength, its unity, was also its most vulnerable point. To preserve peace, they must confront not only the external threat but also the latent discord that allowed such a faction to rise. Days turned into weeks, and the attacks continued sporadically. The king and his council adapted, using intelligence, patience, and subtlety to anticipate the enemy's moves. Villagers were taught defensive measures, scouts patrolled tirelessly, and Amatse worked to reinforce trust and communication among the people. Slowly, a pattern emerged. The intruders were searching for something specific, though what it was remained a mystery. Finally, one night, a captured scout revealed the faction's leader, a former advisor to a disgraced noble family, one who had sworn vengeance against the throne and its allies. The leader's plan was intricate, aimed at destabilizing a Santaman from within while distracting its defenders with external chaos. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place, revealing a conspiracy that threatened to undo everything the kingdom had rebuilt. Kwame Kofi gathered his council, determination blazing in his eyes. "We now know our enemy," he declared. "The time for cautious observation is over. We must act with precision and courage. This faction will not succeed. A Santaman will stand united and unbroken, as it always has. Tomorrow we take back the night and reclaim our kingdom's peace." The council nodded, their resolve matching the king's. In the silence that followed, the weight of responsibility pressed upon them all, but so did the unyielding spirit of those determined to defend the kingdom they loved. The coming days would test their strength, wisdom, and unity like never before, but they faced the challenge with a steadfast belief that a Santaman's light would outshine any shadow. The first light of dawn spilled across the kingdom of a Santaman, painting the streets and palaces in soft gold. Yet beneath the beauty of the morning, a tension lingered. Word had spread of unusual movements at the borders, small bands of men traveling under the cover of night, striking villages on the outskirts, and vanishing without a trace. Rumors swirled that these were not mere thieves or opportunistic raiders, but an organized force testing the defenses of the kingdom. The council convened urgently in the great hall, the air heavy with unease and the scent of burning incense. From ceremonial braziers, King Kwame Kofi stood at the center, his posture steady, yet his mind alert. He listened as Zuberi Taji detailed reports from scouts, villages stripped of supplies, fields burned, and farmers reporting missing livestock. The precision and speed of the raids indicated strategic planning rather than random mischief. Their goal is not just to steal, Zuberi warned, but to create fear and confusion. They want us divided before they strike deeper into our lands. Amatse, her brow furrowed with concern, leaned toward the king. "We must act before panic spreads," she urged, her voice calm but firm. "The people trust us to protect them." Kwame Kofi's gaze swept across his council, weighing options with a careful mind. He knew that rushing into battle without understanding the enemy's motives could lead to disaster. Instead, he proposed a strategy rooted in observation, intelligence, and swift, targeted action. "We will send scouts further into the borderlands," he said, "and gather information. We must learn who we face, what they want, and how they operate. Our response will be precise, not reactionary." The council agreed, recognizing the wisdom in patience and preparation. Meanwhile, in the northern forests, the raiders convened around a flickering fire. Their leader, a man cloaked in shadows with eyes like burning coals, spoke to his followers in a hushed, commanding tone. "A Santaman grows strong, but strength without fear is fragile. We will test them, and when they are distracted, we will Strike where it hurts most. His words stirred a sense of purpose in the group, each member understanding that the stakes were higher than simple theft. Supplies alone would not satisfy them. They sought power, influence, and the collapse of order in the kingdom. Back in the capital, the first scouts returned with alarming news. A small village near the border had been completely abandoned, its inhabitants vanished without a trace. Tracks led deeper into the forest, indicating that the raiders were organized and mobile. Kwame Kofi examined the maps tracing the path of the invaders, while Zuberi Taji and Amatse discussed potential countermeasures. "We must prepare the villages," Zuberi suggested. "Fortify key positions, ensure supplies are hidden, and teach the people to remain calm and vigilant. Panic will serve the enemy more than strength." Amatse took it upon herself to visit the most vulnerable villages, traveling with a small contingent of guards. She offered reassurance, distributed supplies, and trained villagers in basic defense techniques. Her presence had a profound effect. People who might have succumbed to fear felt courage in her stead. Children were taught to run and hide safely, while adults learned to signal threats discreetly. The seeds of resilience were being planted, but the shadow of the raiders loomed, and everyone knew the calm was temporary. As days passed, the kingdom's borders grew tense. Scouts brought back fragments of intelligence, patterns in the raiders' movements, whispers of alliances forming with outsiders, and evidence that their leader was a strategist well-versed in the terrain. Kwame Kofi, Amatse, and Zuberi Taji convened nightly to analyze every report. Maps were spread across the table, pins marking sightings, and threads connecting known routes. "We cannot underestimate them," Kwame Kofi said, tracing a path with his finger. "Every decision we make must consider not only the safety of our people, but also the possibility of a trap." One night, as a cold wind swept through the capital, Kwame Kofi stood on the balcony overlooking the quiet streets. The moonlight reflected off the polished roofs, and for a brief moment the kingdom seemed untouched by fear. Yet in the shadows, movements betrayed the presence of spies and scouts from the enemy's camp. Kwame Kofi's instincts, honed by years of leadership and experience, told him that the coming days would demand every ounce of strategy, courage, and unity the kingdom could muster. In the forested outskirts, the raider leader plotted the next phase of his plan. He sent out small parties to create diversions, cutting off communication lines, setting traps, and spreading false rumors. His ultimate goal was to lure the kingdom's forces into overextending, then strike decisively at the heart of a Santaman. Each raider understood their role with precision. There was no room for error. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension almost tangible, as if the forest itself held its breath in expectation of the coming conflict. Back in the capital, Kwame Kofi called for a special assembly of village leaders and militia captains. He explained the strategy: maintain vigilance, report movements, avoid engagement unless necessary, and protect civilians above all. Orders were clear, and responsibilities were delegated meticulously. Villages were reinforced discreetly, scouts patrolled in shifts, and secret communication networks were established using signals known only to trusted individuals. The kingdom was preparing not for reckless confrontation, but for a calculated defense. Amatse, observing the training sessions, noticed the changes in the people. Fear was gradually giving way to discipline. Hesitation was replaced by alertness. The villagers began to take pride in their ability to protect themselves and support one another. Children who had once hidden at the slightest noise now followed instructions with focus, and elders shared wisdom from past conflicts. The spirit of unity, nurtured over years, proved to be a formidable force. One evening, scouts reported a significant movement. A larger force than anticipated had gathered near the northern ridge. Kwame Kofi, Amatse, and Zuberi Taji held an emergency council. The king made a decision that balanced caution with assertiveness. We will engage, but not directly. We will use our knowledge of the terrain, our fortified positions, and our understanding of the enemy's habits to gain the advantage. Every step will be measured. Plans were made to lure the raiders into narrow passes where their numbers would count for less, using natural obstacles to weaken their momentum and trap them strategically. As the day of confrontation approached, the kingdom held its breath. Families stayed close, sentries kept vigilant watch, and scouts reported continuously. Kwame Kofi walked through the city streets, offering words of reassurance and encouragement. He reminded everyone that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. Amatse, moving from village to village, ensured that morale remained high and that preparedness was consistent. Zuberi Taji supervised the deployment of forces with a meticulous eye, checking every barricade, every signal, and every patrol route. When the raiders finally advanced, the kingdom was ready. Ambushes were set, paths blocked, and reinforcements positioned for quick deployment. The invaders, confident in their numbers, were met with disciplined resistance, strategic maneuvers, and unyielding unity. The clash was intense, the air filled with shouts, the clash of weapons, and the cries of both fear and determination. The raiders, though formidable, were outmaneuvered at every turn, their plans disrupted by the foresight and coordination of Asanteman's defenders. After hours of conflict, the raiders retreated, battered and disoriented. The people of Asanteman, exhausted but triumphant, celebrated their survival and resilience. Kwame Kofi, standing atop a hill overlooking the battlefield, knew that while the immediate threat had been neutralized, vigilance must remain. The kingdom had survived through strategy, unity, and courage, proving that preparation and foresight could turn fear into strength. As night fell and the stars illuminated the recovering kingdom, families reunited and fires burned brightly in every home. The victory was celebrated quietly with gratitude and reflection. Amatse, by the hearth of her own home, shared stories of bravery and quick thinking, reminding everyone that courage, wisdom, and unity were the true shields of Asanteman. Zuberi Taji, surveying the aftermath, began planning improvements to defenses and communication, ensuring that the kingdom would be stronger than ever before. Kwame Kofi, sitting in the throne room, felt the weight of leadership, but also the fulfillment of seeing his people safe and prepared. The raids had tested their strength, exposed vulnerabilities, and forced growth. The kingdom had emerged not only intact, but resilient, a testament to the power of foresight, unity, and unwavering courage. The memory of the threat would remain, a lesson etched into the fabric of Asanteman, guiding future generations to value preparation, community, and vigilance. The air in Asanteman had grown heavy with unease, a stark contrast to the vibrant celebrations of unity that had marked the past months. King Kwame Kofi sensed the tension even before it became apparent to the villagers. Morning mist hovered low over the fields, and an unnatural stillness pervaded the market square. Merchants whispered in hushed tones, and travelers from distant villages spoke of strange sightings in the forests surrounding the kingdom. Amatse, ever perceptive, noticed the change in the expressions of those she passed, the subtle furrows of worry etched across familiar faces. Zuberi Taji returned from the borderlands with troubling news. Scouts had reported that groups of outsiders, cloaked in the garb of wandering traders, were moving through the outskirts of a santamon, observing the villages and making inquiries under the guise of curiosity. Their numbers were small, but their intent seemed deliberate. They carried with them a faint air of menace, and some villagers claimed to have seen them speaking in languages unfamiliar and sharp to the ears. Zuberi warned the king that while no overt aggression had yet occurred, the patterns suggested a probing, an evaluation of defences and resources. The council convened urgently in the royal hall. Advisors, military captains and elder scholars filled the chamber, voices overlapping as concern mounted. "We cannot dismiss this as mere coincidence," Zuberi began, placing a worn map of the kingdom on the table. "They move with caution and strategy. Their goal is not simple trade. They are studying us, waiting for the moment to exploit any weakness." Amatse added, her tone measured but firm. "King Kwame, the peace we have cultivated is fragile. If we show complacency, even the smallest threat could unravel what we have built. We must understand their motives and prepare without alarming our people." King Kwame Kofi nodded, his eyes sweeping over the gathered council. "We will not act in haste, but neither will we ignore the signs." Zuberi organized discreet patrols along the borders and forests. Amma, ensure the villages are informed of vigilance, but not fear. Our strength lies in unity and calm minds. His words carried the weight of authority, but also the reassurance of care. As days passed, the presence of the outsiders became more noticeable. Villagers reported brief encounters near river crossings and along narrow forest paths. Each time, the strangers vanished before being approached, leaving only a faint echo of their passage, footprints in mud, the flicker of torches in the night, and the whispers of languages strange and melodic. Rumors began to swirl, and while the elders advised restraint, fear crept quietly into homes, replacing the joy that had once characterized the kingdom. King Kwame Kofi, determined to uncover the truth, devised a plan. He would not confront these outsiders openly, but would instead send a team of trusted scouts, led by Zuberi Taji, to track and observe them. The mission required stealth and patience. Zuberi selected men and women renowned for their skill in navigation and tracking, each sworn to secrecy and loyalty. The scouts were equipped not with swords alone, but with tools for observation, maps, night vision aids, and communication signals, designed to avoid detection. Amatse, though reluctant to see any risk before the scouts, understood the necessity of knowledge. She spent long hours with the children and villagers, teaching them resilience and strategies to avoid unnecessary confrontation. She spoke of courage tempered by wisdom, reminding all that fear could be a weapon if wielded incorrectly. Her calm presence became a shield for the villagers, preventing panic from taking root while ensuring preparedness. The scouts set out at dusk, moving like shadows through the dense forest. Their journey was arduous, navigating under the cover of night and evading patrols of their own, all while attempting to track the movements of the outsiders. Zuberi, experienced and patient, led with a steady hand, ensuring that the team remained undetected. After several nights, they began to uncover patterns: small camps hidden in the forest, supplies stockpiled near riverbanks, and subtle signs of intelligence gathering, marked trees, disturbed underbrush, and discreet messages left in the form of carvings. One evening, as the scouts observed a camp from a concealed ridge, they noticed a figure that stood apart from the rest. Cloaked in dark cloth, the stranger moved with authority, issuing orders that the others obeyed without hesitation. Zuberi realized that they had identified the leader, a strategist skilled in manipulation and subterfuge. He instructed the team to return to the kingdom with all the gathered information, emphasizing the need for secrecy and swift counsel. Upon their return, the council convened once more. The maps, notes, and sketches were spread across the hall. "This is more than a simple intrusion," Suberi explained. "Their organization suggests preparation for a larger endeavor. They are testing our defenses, understanding our people, and calculating the best time to strike. We must act decisively to protect Asantaman." King Kwame Kofi considered the findings, his mind weighing the safety of his people against the risk of provoking an unnecessary conflict. "We cannot allow fear to guide our decisions," he said, "yet neither can we ignore the evidence. We will fortify our defenses subtly, train our scouts and villagers in emergency protocols, and remain vigilant. Amma, continue your guidance to the people. Zuberi, coordinate with the militia to establish watchpoints without alarming the villages." In the following days, Asantaman transformed into a kingdom of quiet preparedness. Hidden watchtowers were built along forest edges, and secret paths were cleared to facilitate communication and rapid response. Villagers practiced evacuation, drills, learned signals to warn neighbors, and honed skills to detect deception. Children, unaware of the looming threat, were taught games that sharpened observation and reflexes, blending play with preparation. Despite the tension, the people of Asantaman continued their daily lives, tending to fields, trading in the markets, and celebrating small victories of harvests and crafts. The balance of normalcy and vigilance became a testament to the resilience instilled by their leaders. King Kwame Kofi made frequent visits to the outskirts, speaking with scouts and villagers alike, reinforcing trust and ensuring that courage remained rooted in knowledge rather than panic. One night, under a crescent moon, Amatse observed shadows moving along the horizon. She signaled to Zuberi, who immediately dispatched a small reconnaissance party. The movement belonged to a scout of the outsiders, unaware of the kingdom's preparations. The encounter confirmed that the enemy was probing once more, testing the vigilance of Asantaman's defenses. This small victory emboldened the council and demonstrated that preparedness, unity, and strategic thinking could turn fear into strength. King Kwame Kofi called for a meeting of all village leaders. "Our strength lies not in secrecy alone, but in the courage and cooperation of our people," he declared. "We will meet the challenges ahead together with wisdom and vigilance. The peace we have nurtured is worth protecting, and we will not falter in its defense." The leaders responded with nods of agreement and solemn determination, understanding the magnitude of the trials that lay ahead. The days that followed were filled with quiet fortification and careful observation. Scouts monitored the forests, villagers trained in emergency response, and messengers maintained swift communication throughout the kingdom. Rumors of the outsiders persisted, but the knowledge of preparedness and the confidence in leadership steadied the hearts of the people. As the first month of heightened vigilance drew to a close, the council realized that the outsiders had not yet revealed their full intent. Their movements suggested patience and precision, a calculated strategy designed to exploit any lapse in attention. The realization strengthened the resolve of King Kwame Kofi and Amatse, who redoubled efforts to instill discipline and alertness among the people. In the quiet moments, away from the watchtowers and training drills, the king reflected on the nature of leadership. True strength, he realized, was not in brute force or fear, but in foresight, preparation, and the unity of a people bound by trust. Amatse shared this perspective with the villagers, reinforcing the lessons that would sustain them not only through immediate threats, but for generations to come. As night fell, The torches of a santaman glimmered like stars along the edges of the forest. The kingdom, though aware of the looming danger, remained unbroken, a testament to its resilience and the wisdom of those who led with both courage and care. The outsiders watched from a distance, unaware that their calculated plans were being anticipated, and that a santaman had transformed from a kingdom of celebration into a fortress of vigilance, ready to face the trials that the coming days would bring. A heavy fog settled over a santaman that morning, shrouding the kingdom in a muted grey haze. The usual vibrancy of the marketplace was subdued. Merchants whispered anxiously among themselves, casting wary glances at the horizon. Rumours had begun to circulate that strangers had been seen at the edges of the kingdom, cloaked figures moving silently through the forests. King Kwame Kofi, aware of the potential danger, summoned Zuberi Taji and Amatse to the council chamber. The room was tense, the air thick with anticipation. Zuberi, standing tall with his arms crossed, spoke first. "Your Majesty, scouts have reported unusual activity near the northern borders. Travellers who passed that route claim to have glimpsed men wearing black cloaks, carrying weapons that resemble the ones used by the old marauders. They move like shadows, leaving no trace." His voice carried the weight of concern, but it was tempered with the resolve of a warrior who had faced threats before. Amatse's gaze was steady, her hands resting lightly on the table. "We cannot underestimate them," she said softly. "We've seen how quickly fear can spread, and the people must not panic." King Kwame Kofi nodded solemnly. "Prepare our scouts and strengthen the northern patrols. I want every village along the border informed and ready. We cannot allow strangers to move through our lands undetected. Zuberi, lead the defense preparations. Amatse, oversee the communication with the villagers and ensure their safety." Both advisors bowed and left to carry out their orders, leaving the king alone with his thoughts. He knew that the peace they had built over the past months was fragile and could be shattered if these unknown figures had ill intentions. By midday, the first reports reached the capital. Villagers described seeing shadows flit between the trees, hearing whispers carried by the wind, and spotting mysterious fires in the distance. Tension gripped the population. Fear threatened to undo the unity that the kingdom had worked so hard to achieve. The council convened again, this time joined by village leaders and senior warriors. Each report painted a picture of a force moving deliberately, carefully, and with purpose. No ordinary bandits, these were organized and strategic, a fact that alarmed even the bravest among them. Zuberi outlined a plan. "We cannot simply wait for them to strike. We need to establish watchtowers at key points along the northern edge, and coordinate patrols that move in shifts to ensure constant vigilance. The villagers closest to the border must be given weapons and trained in defensive techniques. We cannot rely solely on our soldiers. The people themselves must be prepared." He paused, studying the faces around him. "I suggest we also send a small reconnaissance party into the forest. We need to know who they are and what they want before they reach the heart of a santaman." Amatse raised a concern. "We must balance vigilance with care. Panic spreads faster than shadows. If we arm everyone too hastily or give them fear to feed upon, we risk fracturing the trust we've built. Information must be precise and our actions deliberate." Her words resonated with the assembly, reminding them that strength alone would not be enough. Wisdom and measured action were equally necessary. That evening, King Kwame Kofi stood atop the highest tower of the palace, looking toward the northern horizon. The fog had thickened, and the outlines of trees were mere shadows against the darkening sky. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Every decision he made in the coming days could determine the safety of his kingdom. He whispered a quiet prayer, seeking guidance and courage. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine, a reminder of the natural world that both protected and challenged them. Meanwhile, the reconnaissance party, led by Zuberi and a select group of seasoned warriors, moved cautiously through the forest. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches entwined in a canopy that blocked much of the fading light. Every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves heightened their senses. After hours of careful movement, they stumbled upon signs of a camp, black cloaks draped over rudimentary poles, smouldering fires, and footprints indicating more than a dozen people. The warriors exchanged tense glances, realizing that this was not a chance encounter, but a planned intrusion. Zuberi signaled the group to remain hidden. They observed the camp from a ridge, noting patterns in the strangers' behavior. The cloaked figures moved with coordination, communicating through gestures and brief whispers. Some sharpened weapons while others patrolled the perimeter. One of the scouts, a young man named Ose, whispered, "They're disciplined, not just raiders. They know what they're doing." Zuberi nodded, his jaw tight with concern. "We must report back immediately. This is bigger than we imagined. The king needs to know the true scale of the threat." Returning under the cover of darkness, the group relayed their findings. King Kwame Kofi listened intently, his face grave. "We have underestimated them," he admitted. "This is not just an attack. It is a strategic move to test our defenses and our resolve. We must act swiftly and with precision. Zuberi, I want a defensive perimeter established by dawn. Amatse, ensure the villagers are informed discreetly and have a plan to evacuate if necessary." The king's voice carried authority and calm, instilling a sense of purpose rather than panic. Preparations continued through the night. Soldiers fortified key points along the northern border, archers positioned themselves in trees, and villagers practiced emergency drills. Amatse moved from village to village, reassuring families and ensuring that every child and elder knew what to do in case of an attack. Despite the tension, the people's unity was evident. They worked together, setting aside fears to focus on collective safety. The fog seemed to mirror the uncertainty of the moment, but their resolve burned brighter than any shadow. By morning, the strangers' movements became bolder. Scouts reported small groups advancing toward the border, testing the vigilance of the patrols. Zuberi led counter-patrols to intercept and observe them without direct confrontation, gathering intelligence while avoiding unnecessary conflict. King Kwame Kofi remained at the palace, coordinating efforts and monitoring the situation. Every decision required balance, strength without recklessness, caution without hesitation. The kingdom's survival depended on it. Amatse, observing from a distance, noted patterns in the stranger's approach. "They are probing," she told Zuberi. "They want to see how we respond, where our weaknesses lie. If we act predictably, they will exploit it. We must remain adaptive." Zuberi nodded, adjusting strategies based on her insights. Villagers and soldiers alike moved like parts of a single organism, shifting positions, ready to respond as one. The tension was palpable, but so too was the determination to protect their home. As the day unfolded, the first direct confrontation occurred. A small group of cloaked figures attempted to breach a village perimeter, expecting minimal resistance. They were met with coordinated defense, villagers raising alarms, archers firing warning shots, and warriors stepping forward with shields and spears. The intruders were taken aback by the preparedness and cohesion of those they sought to intimidate. After a brief but tense standoff, they retreated, disappearing back into the forest. The village erupted in relief, yet King Kwame Kofi knew this was only the beginning. The intruders would test them again, more strategically, and perhaps with greater force. By evening, scouts returned with new information. The strangers were more numerous than initially believed, and their movement suggested that this was not a spontaneous raid, but a well-coordinated operation. King Kwame Kofi called another council, including Zuberi, Amatse, and senior warriors. "We are facing a force that challenges not just our defenses, but our understanding of strategy," he said. "We must anticipate their moves, protect our people, and prepare for any outcome. This is a test of our unity, courage, and wisdom. We cannot fail." The council nodded in solemn agreement, aware that the days ahead would determine the fate of Asantaman. Night fell, and the kingdom held its collective breath. Fires burned in strategic locations, watchful eyes scanned the fog, and the wind carried both caution and resolve. King Kwame Kofi, standing on the palace tower, felt the weight of leadership, but also the strength of his people. In the quiet darkness, he made a silent vow. No matter the challenges, Asantaman would endure. The shadows at the border were formidable, but the light of unity and courage within the kingdom would not be extinguished. The first wave of the shadowed threat had tested their vigilance. The coming days promised greater challenges, and every decision would carry consequences. Yet, even in the face of uncertainty, the people of Asantaman moved with purpose, a reminder that the greatest strength of any kingdom lay not in walls or weapons, but in the hearts and minds of its people. In the forest beyond the fog, the cloaked figures regrouped, planning their next move, unaware that they had already underestimated the resilience of the kingdom they sought to disrupt. As we reach the conclusion of this journey through the lands of Asantaman, it is clear that the story is more than a tale of kings, queens, and battles. It is a reflection of human resilience, the power of forgiveness, and the enduring strength of unity. Each chapter has woven lessons of courage, wisdom, and compassion, illustrating how, even in the face of adversity, hope and determination can reshape destinies. The characters' struggles and triumphs remind us that leadership is not merely about authority, but about service, empathy, and integrity. Beyond the grandeur of ceremonies and the thrill of conflicts, the essence of the story lies in the connections forged between individuals, the bonds that survive betrayal, and the trust rebuilt through patience and understanding. The narrative has explored not only political maneuverings and societal challenges, but also the deeply personal journeys of growth, loyalty, and love. Through trials and tribulations, the people of Asantaman discovered the strength within themselves and each other, proving that true harmony arises from collaboration and shared purpose. As this chronicle closes, the echoes of laughter in the village squares, the courage displayed on the battlefield, and the wisdom shared in quiet conversations linger in the imagination. These moments serve as enduring reminders that history is shaped not only by leaders, but by the collective spirit of the community. May the lessons of Asantaman inspire reflection, encourage perseverance, and foster hope in our own lives, reminding us that even in darkness, the light of understanding, justice, and unity can guide the way. The story may end here, but its echoes remain a testament to the timeless values of empathy, courage, and the unbreakable bonds that define humanity.